Chapter 636. Sooner or later we will have to face it. Why should we be afraid? Dudian indifferently said, "Get ready." Richelieu deeply looked at him and bowed his head. Yes. Whoosh. A snow pigeon landed on the windowsill of Carvey's study. Carvey was recording the secret activities of the third area of the Dark Church in recent days. He was waiting for the Pope to return. He frowned when he saw the sudden arrival of the snow pigeon. He stopped writing and took the scroll from the foot of the snow pigeon. He slowly rubbed the scroll and looked at it. After a moment, his pupils shrank and he cried out in amazement, "Pass the throne? Promote a little apprentice knight?" The small characters on the scroll were real. After a moment Carvey slowly recovered. He felt that it was unbelievable. He even felt that someone had secretly borrowed this communication channel or replaced the letter. "Let's verify it first," he thought in his heart. He immediately took out a new piece of paper and started to write. On the other side, the famous poet Anthony was drinking and explaining the difference between classical and modern poetry to his two proud students. Suddenly, his eyebrows twitched and a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. He calmly stopped his lecture and said, "Today's class is over. Go back and think about what the teacher said. Remember, emotions are not the only thing about poetry. Poetry not only has praise, but it also has criticism. Most importantly, poetry must have dignity." "Yes. Yes, teacher." The two students respectfully got up and left. After the two students left, Anthony indifferently said, "Sir, come out." A figure shrouded in a black robe slowly walked out from the shadows behind the room. His body seemed to be filled with a vague mist, making it difficult to see his face and figure. He laughed in a low voice. "Master has implanted a hunter's eye. His perception is really not comparable to ordinary people." "I dare not." Anthony indifferently said, "Sir is the master. You flatter us. We only know how to do what you call evil. We can't be compared to a great poet like you." The black-robed figure laughed. "Today I came to find you mainly because the Holy Church has given you a task. I hope you must complete it by today." What mission?" Antonia frowned. The black-robed figure said in a low voice, as usual, still writing poems. "This time, it's a poem in praise of an apprentice knight of the Light Vatican. His name is Barton." "Eulogizing an apprentice knight?" Antonia was a little surprised. "And one from the Holy Church? When did the Dark Church become so kind?" He pondered for a moment and said, "Is there anything special about this person?" "There's nothing special about him. He's just a normal person." The black-robed figure said slowly, however, "His identity is not ordinary. He is about to ascend the throne and become the new pope." "A new pope?" Antonia stood up abruptly from his chair and looked at the black-robed figure in shock. "You're saying that Richelieu is going to abdicate? How is this possible? How could this happen so suddenly?" "It is very sudden, which is why I need you to compose a eulogy for the new pope, to make everything seem more natural," the black-robed figure said. Anthony was startled. He suddenly realized something. His heart was filled with a chill. Is it possible that the Dark Church is the one who planned the change of the Pope? How is this possible? This is not something you should know. You should think about how to write a good eulogy. The black-robed figure said coldly. "Write it and give it to the Rice Chamber of Commerce. They will print it for you as soon as possible." "Rice Chamber of Commerce?" Antonia's face slightly changed. Although he didn't have a deep relationship with the Dark Church, but he knew that the Rice Chamber of Commerce was controlled by the Dark Church. In other words, this matter was completely planned by the Dark Church. It was hard for him to imagine how the Dark Church could suddenly get involved in the change of the Pope. It must be known that the Holy Church had been suppressing the Dark Church for so many years. Otherwise, the Dark Church wouldn't have been forced to hide in the dark. After all, the process of hiding was very painful for many dark believers. They were hunted everywhere and could only live alone in a dark place. Moreover, it was very inconvenient. This also led to many dark believers becoming more and more eccentric the longer they joined the dark church. However, the dark church had directly controlled the heart of the Holy Church. This was simply unimaginable. He couldn't imagine what would happen to the outer wall in the future if the Holy Church was controlled by the dark church. Would it be chaos or destruction when the light was mixed with the darkness? His mind was a little confused. Soon, the words of the black-robed figure interrupted his thoughts. One more thing. At noon, the List Chamber of Commerce will send someone to interview you. During the interview, please support the new Pope, Mr. Barton. He is a great leader. I hope you can keep this in mind. Antonia came back to his senses. His facial expression kept changing. He knew that the other party wanted him to remember this sentence. He wanted him to praise the new pope in the interview around this core sentence. He could not say anything else that would cause people to think of negative things. This interview was just for show. Even if he didn't say so, the newspaper would speak for him. I know. He slightly bowed his head. The morning sun shone down from the slopes of Utopia Mountain. The warm light dispelled the darkness and chill that shrouded countless buildings. Newspaper delivery boys rode fast horses as they delivered newspapers to households. Some were aristocratic manors, some were rich people's courtyards, and some were exquisite huts. They delivered newspapers from the bustling areas of the outer wall to the suburbs and then to the towns and villages. The newspaper delivery men from the various newspaper companies were like ants, shuttling ceaselessly on the streets, carrying the news. A farmer was enjoying a leisurely breakfast as he drank his steaming soup, ate his cheese bread, and flipped through the morning paper at 7:30 a.m. However, the moment he opened the newspaper, he was stunned. His eyes widened and he forgot to swallow the soup in his mouth. The soup almost flowed down the corner of his mouth as he stared at the headline on the newspaper with his mouth wide open. The news was written on the largest page of the newspaper. Mr. Richelieu, the 9th Pope of the Holy Church, will inherit the position of Pope. The new Pope will take charge. The farmer was stunned for a moment before he came to his senses. He hurriedly continued reading, and after a while, he finished reading the entire newspaper. The soup was no longer hot, and the cheese bread beside it was cold, but he had completely forgotten about it. He was lost in thought. After all, the matter of the replacement of the Pope was a huge matter even for an ordinary citizen like him. In addition to spreading faith and building shrines, the luminous church was also in charge of land division, as well as some land taxes, asylum tax, and so on. The so-called asylum tax was something that everyone had to pay, even the commoners in the common district were no exception, unless they were so poor that they ended up in the slums and became refugees. The asylum tax included a lot of things such as the invasion of the dark believers, the invasion of monsters outside the giant wall, and so on. But it didn't include the invasion of beasts. This was the responsibility of the military. Therefore, these taxes may change if the Pope was replaced. This had happened in the past when the Pope was replaced. The biggest change was after the 6th Pope took office. He increased the asylum tax by 10% in one fell swoop. This made the civilians miserable. Fortunately, the Pope was killed by the dark believers in less than 10 years. It was one of the few times in history when many people were grateful to the dark believers. The new Pope. The farmer looked worried. This year's harvest was not good. If the new Pope raised the tax, then the burden on his family would be heavy. He might even have to face the situation of firing the serf. As the morning newspaper was sent out, exclamations were heard from the various manors. The sudden news caught everyone off guard. They didn't expect the change of the Pope to be so sudden. Although such a sudden change had happened in history, but not many times. Was there something wrong with the body of the previous Pope? For a time, countless people speculated. Holy Church has a lot of tricks up their sleeves. I wonder if they have the cooperation of the military this time. Elora listened to everyone and was silent for a moment. Then she said, "We must find Richelieu before noon today. Also, immediately investigate the background of the new pope." "Leave the investigation of the new pope to me," one of the elders said. "All right." Elora nodded. After a while, the meeting ended. The crowd gradually dispersed. The elder who had suggested investigating the new pope left the Knights' Hall and went straight to his castle. Once he entered the castle, he went upstairs to his room. Just as he opened the door, he saw a figure in a black robe and mask sitting on the sofa in the middle of his room. The figure was enjoying a cup of tea and had his legs crossed. There was a black scorpion tattoo on his wrist. Someone who dared to carve a tattoo on such an obvious place was either a careless rookie or extremely confident. How did the meeting go? The black-robed figure tilted his head to look at the elder who had just entered and asked with a smile. The elder saw how relaxed he was and was slightly taken aback. His face darkened and he said, "This is my home. You better be careful. If someone sees me, I will be exposed." "Don't worry." The black-robed figure smiled and said, "If someone comes near, I will know without opening the door." The elder knew his ability, but he still felt that his attitude made him unhappy. He frowned slightly and did not pursue the matter further. He sat on the other side of the sofa and said, everyone else also felt that the change of pope was too sudden. There was no prior news and they thought that there was some kind of plan behind it. So, everyone is currently investigating and preparing to find Richelieu's whereabouts. Yes, this is within the expectations of our Lord. The black-robed figure nodded slightly. The elder's eyes moved and he asked, "Who is that Lord?" Chapter 637. It's him. The old man was surprised. Does Richelieu's disappearance have anything to do with him? This isn't something you should know. The black-robed man's voice was cold. What did they say in today's meeting? What are they going to do? Will they contact the inner wall? The old man frowned. Our Knights' Hall has always adhered to the principle of fairness and justice. Although this matter is a bit strange, but they wouldn't contact the inner wall to intervene in the affairs of the outer wall. This would disrupt the structure of the outer wall. They are only looking for Richelieu and ask him about the situation. I think they suspect that Richelieu is dead or has been kidnapped. Oh. The black-robed man chuckled. The old man's face turned gloomy. What do you mean by oh? I mean I didn't think that the thoughts of the old guys in the Knights' Hall would have been predicted by the Lord. The black-robed man chuckled. If you contact the forces of the inner wall, then you might be able to pick up a bargain. Unfortunately, you missed such a good opportunity. It's no wonder that the Knights' Hall is declining day by day. In today's era, who would abide by the so-called chivalry except for those civilians who have no way to climb up? The old man's expression changed slightly. His eyes flickered as he said, "Aren't you afraid that I'll tell them about this? Do you dare?" The black-robed man smiled as he looked at the old man. The old man looked at him. "I'm cooperating with you because I'm grateful to you. Why wouldn't I dare if it's about the life and death of countless people in the outer wall? Then you can try." The black-robed man didn't care about the old man's angry expression. "Don't forget what you've done. Your family, your children, grandchildren, and all your friends will be burned at the stake if it's exposed. There are more than one legendary knight who colluded with the Dark Church. You know better than me what happened to them." The old man clenched his fists and said with a cold look in his eyes, "This is the last time I'll cooperate with you. From today onwards, I hope you won't come looking for me again. Even if you do, I won't cooperate with you anymore. I can't sell my soul to the devil anymore. You devil disciples will go to hell after you die and be entangled by the eternal dark chain for generations to come, never to be purified." Eternal dark chain? The black-robed man chuckled and said, "This is a fiction in the Holy Bible of the Light Church. We don't believe it. We only believe that darkness will never be extinguished. Only darkness is the most real world. Look at you knights, how hypocritical and pitiful. You can insult me, but don't insult the pure glory of a knight," the old man said angrily. "If you don't want to expose yourself, you better keep your voice down." The old man suppressed the anger in his eyes. "You can only give me shame." The black-robed man's eyebrows twitched as he looked at the old man with interest. The black-robed man raised his eyebrows and looked at him with interest. He clapped his hands and said, "Not bad, not bad. No wonder you're a legendary knight. You're really determined. However, this is not empty talk. It's the truth. It's also what that lord told me to tell you. It's up to you whether you believe it or not. I don't think that lord has any reason to lie to you. After all, you have to do this unless you want everything you've done to be exposed. If that's the case, your knight's spirit and the knight's medal will be destroyed. Even the knight's hall won't allow someone like you to stay, right?" The old man was startled. Cold sweat oozed from his forehead as he clenched his fists. "You're ruthless. It's good that you agree." The black-robed man got up. "I'll leave the matter of covering up the true identity of the new pope to you. If there are other tasks I'll come back to convey to you. The situation is turbulent, so don't stand on the wrong side. If you stand on the eliminated team, then you'll be miserable," the old man snorted. "You don't need to talk too much." "That's good. Ha! Will the Holy Church be able to get past the matter of you suddenly replacing the Pope?" The old man stared at him. "Even if Richelieu agrees to abdicate, but those cardinals won't be easy to deal with. You don't need to worry about that. We have launched the highest-level plan, the Dark Moon Plan." The black-robed man waved his hand. "Don't forget that the hotter the sun is, the deeper the shadow is." The old man was startled. At the same time, an emergency meeting was held in the military headquarters of the Western region. Many prominent generals had arrived. The replacement of the Holy Church's pontiff was undoubtedly the biggest issue in the outer wall. For them, this was more serious than the barbarians invading the border. Chapter 638. Sandro was sitting in the master's seat in the main hall of the Ryan family's castle. He was drinking tea and reading newspapers. 7 or 8 maids were waiting in the main hall. If Dudien was here, he would find that the once humble Ryan castle had become magnificent and luxurious. There were no more than a dozen maids and knights in the castle. Now there were dozens of maids, and they were all over the corridors. There were more than 200 or 300 knights patrolling outside the manor. It was a symbol of status for the aristocracy. It was no less important than money. These knights were the legal private military force of the aristocracy. The number of knights often determined the strength of the aristocracy. At the same time, the town where the Ryan family was located was not the same as before. 4 or 5 farms and pastures had been developed in the mountains outside the town, which were managed by the Ryan family. The food produced was enough to feed all the knights and their squires, as well as servants in the castle. New Pope. Sandro's leisurely expression froze when he saw the news on the newspaper. He quickly put down his crossed legs, opened the newspaper, and read it carefully. After a moment, his face showed a shocked expression. The Pope is going to abdicate? The new Pope is such a big event. How come there was no news in advance? Did the Holy Church block the news? He was in a daze for a long time before he slowly reacted. He frowned and fell into deep thought. If the new Pope ascends to the throne, I don't know if the rule that the nobles can be selected as Knights of Light without taking the test will be changed. It seems that I have to get Jasmine and the others to join the Light Curia as soon as possible. If this rule is abolished, it will be difficult to join again. The butler nodded and went downstairs. Sandro looked out of the window. He was a middle-aged man. There was a trace of worry in his eyes as he looked into the distance. I hope nothing big will happen. There were 12 figures sitting in the hall of the Fillan family. They were the elders of the 12th district. The elder who was killed by Dean had been replaced by someone else. A black-haired teenager and a slender woman were sitting in the hall. The hall was silent. There seemed to be a palpitating force shrouding everyone's body. Dean looked at Philin, who was the patriarch of the Philin family. "General Philin, please take a seat." Philin Cox was flattered. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." An attendant immediately ran up and offered a seat. Dean looked at him. The loyalty of Philin family to the Dark Church didn't happen overnight. Their ancestors had been loyal to the Dark Church. The most respected female general was a member of the Dark Church. She had killed countless barbarians with the secret help of the Dark Church. Therefore, the Philin family had been working for the Dark Church for generations. They were the biggest chess piece of the Dark Church in the military. This was one of the reasons why the Dark Church held an elder meeting in the Philin family. "I'm sure everyone knows about the Dark Moon Plan." Dean looked at the 12 elders and said in a cold voice, "The Dark Church and the Holy Church will be united as one after the new Pope ascends to the throne. We will be in charge of the Holy Church in the future. You don't have to live in the dark anymore. I believe that the military and magistrate will submit to us once the Holy Church falls into our hands." He said "we" instead of "me." It was just a word difference, but many people secretly noticed it. Although they didn't know whether it was intentional or unintentional, but there was a trace of excitement and expectation in their hearts. All of this is due to the efforts of the President. I will listen to any orders from the President. One of the strong men said in a sonorous voice. Everyone was in awe of Dean because they were afraid of him. But now they had more faith and expectation. After all, once the new Pope ascends to the throne in a short period of time, the Holy Church won't be the opponent of the Dark Church, but the servant of the Dark Church. They had been suppressed by the Holy Church for a long time. This kind of thing was only occasionally thought about in their dreams. They didn't dare to think about it at ordinary times. But now it would become a reality. How could they not be excited? Dean nodded. "The civilians don't know enough about the new Pope. I hope that you will implement the Dark Moon Plan in full. In addition to the highest core chess pieces, there is no need to hide the chess pieces that we have placed in other forces. Now is the time for them to play their role." "Elder, these civilians don't know anything about the new Pope. Can we rely on their words alone?" Someone asked in a worried tone. "Don't underestimate the power of authority," Dudian said in a cold voice. "There was a very good example. A deacon of the magistrate didn't investigate in detail and easily judged a case. He said that the defendant was guilty. He said that the wronged person was really guilty. No one would believe that a deacon would judge a wrong case. This is the power of authority." The person who spoke before was silent. "Elder, will we be able to rule the entire outer wall after the Holy Church falls into our hands?" A young man who had replaced the Night King, one of the 3 kings, asked in an expectant tone. Dean indifferently glanced at him. "The other forces aren't fools. They haven't acted yet because they aren't sure. Sooner or later they will know that the Holy Church is under our control after the new Pope succeeds the throne. Don't forget that they will have their eyes and chess pieces in the Holy Church and us." Everyone looked at each other as they heard the words. Dean raised his hand to suppress the commotion. "You don't have to doubt each other. The outer wall will fall into our hands sooner or later. It's useless even if they know about it. Who can stop us from joining forces with the Holy Church?" "The chairman is right." Someone immediately agreed. The prestigious King of Swords immediately expressed his opinion. "The speaker is right. If the Light Church joins forces with us, the military will not be able to withstand a single blow. As for the Inquisition and the Hall of Knights, they are just paper tigers. In the past, they were only able to gain a foothold with the military and the Light Church. Now that the Light Church has fallen, they can only surrender." "Well said." Everyone was excited and happy. Dean saw that everyone was in high spirits, so he explained his plan. He also set up a precaution against the interference of the inner wall. Everyone was in awe as they saw that Dean was so thoughtful. After all, it wasn't as simple as they thought. Once the outer wall was unified, then the biggest problem they would face would be the inner wall. However, no one dared to speak out their worries. It would be tantamount to pouring cold water on them and offend Dean. He was a person who dared to kill the Night King. It wouldn't be worthwhile if they provoked him and got killed. However, this worry slowly disappeared after listening to Dean's plan. Great Chairman's considerations are truly comprehensive. An elder said with a soft sigh, full of admiration. I've seen the Chairman's strategy and talent when I was in the 9th Region. It's really admirable. Hawkeye, who was sitting in the seat of the 9th Region, complimented. Dean waved his hand. If everyone remembers, then the meeting is over. Everyone got up and left one after another. Chapter 639. At this moment, most of the people in the hall had dispersed. Sword King was about to leave when he heard Dean's words. He couldn't help but be startled. He turned around and looked at the black-haired boy sitting above. His eyes flashed slightly, and he smiled naturally. It's his blessing that Mr. Speaker has taken a fancy to him. This subordinate is very happy to offer him to Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Sword King turned to the attendant behind him. Black Crow, since the Speaker thinks highly of you, then follow the Speaker. Don't lose my face. Do you understand? Black Crow nodded. Yes. He turned to Dean. Black Crow is willing to follow the Speaker. Dean nodded slightly. He waited for Sword King and the rest of the elders to leave the hall. Then he turned to Felon Cox. Patriarch Felon, I'll have to trouble you to deal with the military affairs. I'll promote you after this matter is over. In the beginning, Pluto had evil intentions. He was not satisfied with the position of Deputy Speaker. He wanted to assassinate me. Now that he is dead, the position of Deputy Speaker is still empty. As a result, many things of the Dark Church need to be handled by me personally. Sometimes I can't split myself into two. Felix was startled. Her heart was beating wildly. She suppressed the excitement in her heart and respectfully bowed. Speaker, Felix family will do our best to complete your command. Dean nodded. You can go now. Yes. Felix nodded respectfully. Dean glanced at Black Crow after Felix left. Richelieu gave you a good code name. Crow is the fastest type of messenger bird. It has a good meaning. Black Crow's body shook. He slowly looked up at Dean. Black Crow doesn't understand the Speaker's words. Please enlighten me. Didn't I say in the meeting earlier? The Pope was kidnapped by me. He confessed everything, Mr. Riley. Black Crow's face slightly changed. He was silent for a moment. He looked directly into Dean's eyes. So, are you going to kill me? If I wanted to kill you, why would I waste time talking to you? Dean indifferently said, Richelieu has abandoned you. Your life should be over, but I'm willing to give you another life. Be loyal to me. How about it? Riley's eyes moved as he stared at him. I'm willing. Very good. Dean smiled and gently clapped his hands. Sergei, who was acting as an attendant, turned to the back of the hall. All of you come out. After a moment, a group of footsteps sounded. Behind Sergei was a group of people dressed in silk and satin. There were men and women, young and old. They were wearing silk and satin clothes that were commonly worn by nobles. However, they couldn't hide the dark brown scars on their faces, arms, and necks. Riley's face changed as he saw these people. His figure flashed as he rushed forward to support a middle-aged man. He looked at the ugly scars on the middle-aged man's arms and neck. Riley's eyes reddened as his body trembled. He turned to look at Dean. Kill me if you want to kill. Why torture my people? Dean didn't speak. The middle-aged man who was being supported by Riley quickly said, Riley, don't talk nonsense. We are alive thanks to this lord. He is our great benefactor. Riley looked at him and then at Dean. He knew that he had made a slip of the tongue. He bowed to Dean and said, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry. Black Crow has offended you. Black Crow deserves to die. I hope you can be magnanimous and forgive Black Crow's people. They are innocent. Dean raised his hand to stop Riley's words. I never hurt people who are loyal to me. I won't hurt innocent people either. You don't have to worry about it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Riley was grateful as he bowed his head. Child, it's great to see that you are okay. The middle-aged man looked at Riley. He reached out to cover Riley's face. Riley looked at him in a daze, his eyes red. Father, how did you get hurt? Who hurt you? I don't know. The middle-aged man shook his head and sighed. We have to thank this Lord. If it wasn't for him, we would have suffered more. Riley nodded. Suddenly he thought of something. He glanced at the crowd behind him. His face changed. Mother? The middle-aged man slightly opened his mouth but stopped. His face was ugly as he bowed his head. Dean slowly said in an apologetic tone, I'm sorry, we were late. Your mother is dead. As if struck by lightning, Riley was dumbfounded. The middle-aged man bowed. He is right. Your mother. She couldn't bear it and passed away. Riley felt his body wobbling. He took a few steps back, tripped over the leg of the chair, and sat down on an elder's chair. But at this moment, he didn't feel anything and just sat there in a daze. Dean looked at him and turned to the middle-aged man. You guys have a good chat. I'll go first. The middle-aged man said in awe, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dean took Aisha's hand and left. Sergei followed behind. Riley's eyes gradually recovered after Dean and others left. He immediately stood up and rushed towards his father. He stared at his father. Father, did he send people to harm you and pretend to rescue you? The middle-aged man frowned. It shouldn't be, right? Riley immediately asked, When were you killed? On the 15th of last month. It's been a month since then. The middle-aged man replied. Riley was a bit surprised and then said with relief, Looks like it's not him. How do you know? He knows my identity. He got it from the Pope. He has been holding the Pope for a few days. Riley narrowed his eyes and a cold, killing intent flashed in his eyes. Someone else did this to you. I will find out who the murderer is. The middle-aged man nodded. He has captured a person and is interrogating him for us. There should be news soon. Really? Riley was startled. It was noon. Everyone in the streets and pubs of the outer wall and civilian areas were talking about the change of pope. Everyone was curious about the origin of the new pope. They didn't care much about the reason for the change of pope. First, they didn't think too much about it. Second, even if they thought about it, they knew that they wouldn't be able to know the reason with their own ability. Everyone wanted to know who would be the next pope. Would it be the cardinal that they were familiar with? Or would it be someone hidden by the Holy Church? I heard that the new pope is very young. He must be a genius. Is it God's instruction for him to be the pope at such a young age? Why doesn't God of light care for me? I don't want to be the pope. I want to be a knight of light. You believe in women. God of light didn't purify you. You scum. Amidst the chatter in the tavern, a clear voice suddenly said, As far as I know, this new pope is a once-in-a-century genius of the light curia. He showed extraordinary talent before he was 10 years old and received the God of Light's instruction to enter his dreams. Since then, he has been secretly protected by the light curia and is being groomed as the successor of the pope. It is said that he is not only proficient in poetry and music, but also excellent in swordsmanship. He has been secretly taught swordsmanship by the great Light King since he was young. The rest of the people couldn't help but look at the speaker. A strong man with a red face asked in a rough voice, Who are you? How do you know about this? The man raised his head and took a sip of wine. He laughed and said, You haven't seen the special report of the Luminous Church, right? It's all written there. And today I saw Master Antonia's new poem. The whole poem is full of praise for the new pope. Tell me, if he is not a virtuous person, why would Master Antonia praise him like this? You know, Master Antonia is famous for his arrogance. He never flatters anyone. He once wrote a poem to scold a general in the military. Hearing his words, the others were a little surprised and looked at each other. The strong man stared at him with his bell-like eyes and said, "Have you read the newspaper of the Holy Church? Are you from the Holy Church?" The man said proudly, "Although I am not, I have a friend who is. I heard it from him. This matter has already caused a sensation in the Holy Church." Everyone came to a sudden realization and couldn't help but feel surprised. Awesome! I didn't expect a master like Antonia to write a poem to praise the new pope. I remember that when the previous pope succeeded, Master Antonia didn't write a poem to praise him, right? Boulsh *t. When the previous Pope Richelieu succeeded, Master Antonia was still wearing diapers. Ha ha ha! Who is this Master Antonia you are talking about? You are illiterate. You don't even know Master Antonia? You read the poem for nothing. You said that he is illiterate. How can an illiterate read a poem? The tavern resumed its chaotic state of conversation. The person who spoke earlier took out money to pay the bill as he drank. Then, he left the tavern quietly and walked towards the end of the street before entering another tavern. After leaving the Filin family, Dadian suddenly thought of an oversight. He said to Sergei, "Go and inform Hawkeye. Let him do something." Sergei whispered in Sergei's ear. Sergei was startled after listening to Dudien's order. Yes. Barton and other apprentice knights were on duty on the hill next to the Utopia mountain. Suddenly, more than a dozen horses galloped up from the foot of the hill. All of them were excellent breeds of white wolf horses. They were extremely fast and had sharp teeth. They were the exclusive mounts of regular knights of light. There were silver-armored figures sitting on the back of the horses. In front of these regular knights of light, there was a figure wearing a bright red robe. It was like a strong flame blooming in the snow. It was full of sacred feeling. Barton and others were stunned as they saw the blood-red robe. They couldn't help but rub their eyes. Yes, it was the clothes of a cardinal. A cardinal had come here. Everyone was stunned, but they quickly regained their senses. They suppressed their excitement and straightened their backs, standing ramrod straight. Elnarin rode to the front of the hill. He saw a familiar face in the crowd according to the portrait. There was a trace of jealousy in the depths of his eyes. But he knew that he couldn't do anything about it. He dismounted and came in front of the man. He slightly bowed and said, "Are you Mr. Barton?" Barton was stunned. The other apprentice knights were also dumbfounded. Their eyes were wide open and their chins were about to fall to the ground. "Mr. Barton? Cardinal? How could he call him that?" Barton was so nervous that he stuttered, "Yes, it's me." Seeing this reaction, Elnarin sighed in his heart again. He thought to himself that in the entire Radiant Church, there were so many people who were better than Richelieu that they could line up outside the Golden Wall. He really couldn't understand why Richelieu would choose such a useless person. He still maintained his politeness and said, "Mr. Barton, are you free? Please come with us." Barton was stunned. He suddenly thought of what Dean had said before. His heart jumped. Was it not a joke? "Yes, I'm free," he quickly replied. "Please come with me." Elnarin immediately turned back to the horse. Barton followed behind him in a daze. The other apprentice knights wanted to poke their eyes out when they saw this scene. This dull boy from a noble family was actually appreciated by the cardinal. It was simply unbearable. They knew that from now on they would lose a free laundryman. Moreover, they would have to look up to this person. Elnarin saw Barton's silly look. He pointed to an empty horse and said, "Mr. Barton, please get on the horse." Just as he finished speaking, he suddenly remembered that an apprentice knight couldn't tame a snow-wolf horse. He was about to step forward when he saw Barton grab the horse's hair and jump onto the horse. The snow-wolf horse looked up to the sky and roared twice. It wanted to throw off the person on its back. But Barton was holding the horse's rope tightly. It didn't take a moment for the snow-wolf horse to calm down. Elnarin's eyes lit up as he saw this. He turned around and got on his horse. "Mr. Barton, please come with me." "Yes." Barton nodded honestly. Following the winding mountain path, Elnarin and Barton soon arrived at the top of Mount Utto. They dismounted and walked past St. Mark's Square. It was the first time for Barton to come here. He felt very small as he looked at the huge white square. His heart was full of nervousness, but there was also a trace of fear in his heart. Dean had told him that he would become the new pope in 7 days. Barton only needed to succeed the pope, and he didn't need to worry about anything else. Dean would take care of everything. Now it seemed that the words that were more than a joke had come true. It was like a dream had come true. Is this a dream? Is this not a dream? Barton squeezed his fingers so hard that his fingernails dug deep into his skin. The pain made him feel incredibly steady and excited, but he was more afraid than anything else. In his mind, the Pope was supreme, and he was a nobody. Could he really become the Pope? Would the others agree? Would they laugh at him? Would he be able to manage the Holy Church after he became the Pope? How would he manage it? These thoughts repeatedly passed through his mind. If Elnarin knew what he was thinking at the moment, he would be speechless. Then he would say one word: ignorant. Barton didn't know that the status and significance of the Pope was far beyond his imagination. If someone knew the real situation, they would never believe that an apprentice knight with no background and no merit could become the Pope. However, reality was moving in an inconceivable direction. Even Elnarin, who was leading the way for Barton, felt that he could not see things clearly. He could not believe that the other 7 cardinals would agree to such an inconceivable thing. The reason why he agreed was that the order was passed down by Richelieu. He was Richelieu's confidant, so he couldn't refuse. But the others weren't the same. But after the meeting began, the votes were completely different from what he had imagined. Everyone agreed to it. Chapter 640. 3 hours before the bishop's voting meeting, Rosa angrily crushed the secret letter in his hand and smashed it on the ground. The secret letter had been sent by Richelieu through a secret channel. The seal and handwriting on it were all written by Richelieu himself. However, the contents of the letter made him furious. This old thing actually wanted him to fully support the new pope? How could a mere apprentice knight be worthy of being pope? Was Richelieu out of his mind? He wished he could find Richelieu right now and question him to his face. However, what made him even angrier was that he could not see Richelieu right now. Furthermore, such an important piece of news had been announced to the public without him knowing. This way, even if he joined forces with the other bishops to oppose this matter, the Vatican would still be humiliated. After all, this was a matter as important as the succession of the Pope. If they were to repeatedly reverse it, not only would the people talk about it, they would also become a laughingstock. However, now that things had come to this, he could not care less. Contact the other bishops immediately. I suspect there's something fishy about this. Before we meet the Pope, we cannot elect a new Pope so easily. Rosa's eyes were dark as he said to the butler beside him. The butler looked at his gloomy expression and did not dare to say anything else. He nodded and agreed softly. I don't believe that the other bishops will tolerate a nameless brat as Pope, Rosa thought to himself. As one of the 8 cardinals, he was already in his early 70s. In terms of seniority, he could be considered one of the most senior bishops. He had thought that when Richelieu abdicated, he would be one of the strongest contenders, but now all his hopes had been buried. In order to wait for the day of Richelieu's abdication, he had secretly planted his chess pieces for the past 20 years, preparing for that moment to come. However, this moment had come too quickly and caught him off guard. Furthermore, it had skipped the voting round and swept him out of the race. He could not swallow this anger. After 20 years of careful planning, he was now faced with a situation where he would lose everything. Old man, what are you planning? Damn it! Rosa clenched his fist and hammered it on the table, causing a crack to appear on the wooden table. Just then, footsteps came from outside the door again. Rosa turned his head and saw that the butler who had retreated earlier had returned. A flash of anger flashed across his face as he scolded, "Why are you back? Hurry up and go. If you miss the time, I'll have your head." "Ayaya!" A mocking voice came from behind the butler. In the next moment, the butler's body fell to the ground. He was dead. Rosa's pupils shrank as he looked at the black-robed figure behind the butler. His expression changed slightly as he said, "Dark Church? How dare you come here? Are you here to die?" Although he said that, his palm quietly moved to his back and touched the warning wire under the table. After all, the fact that the latter was able to barge into his ancient castle and act so fearlessly meant that he most likely didn't come with good intentions. The black-robed man smiled and said, "Let me introduce myself first. I am an elder of the 5th District. You guys have given me a pretty good title, Ghost. I quite like it." Rosa said with a cold expression, "I recognize you. You were lucky enough to escape the Battle of Crimson Castle 8 years ago. To think that you would dare to appear before me today. You're quite bold. That time I was bullied by you. Today I want to experience what it feels like to be bullied by numbers." The black-robed man smiled and clapped his hands. Suddenly, the sound of the wind surged from several broken glass windows in the room. With several bangs, the glass windows were smashed, and a few figures jumped in and landed in the room. They formed a triangle and surrounded Rosa. Rosa's expression changed slightly. His finger hooked under the table but found that the hidden wire was loose. It meant that the wire had been cut short. His expression was ugly. He didn't expect that the other party would unknowingly infiltrate his heavily guarded home. This could only mean that there must be pawns of the Dark Church lurking around him. Otherwise, it was impossible for these people to appear here without a sound. "You want to assassinate me with just a few of you? You're too naive." Rosa's eyes were gloomy. He didn't act rashly. Instead, he was stalling for time. He hoped that his confidants and the knights stationed around the castle would be aware of the situation here. "If you really want to fight, my people will immediately rush over. Since you have walked into the trap, don't even think about leaving." Although he knew that he was at a disadvantage, but he couldn't lose his momentum. The black-robed man chuckled. "Bishop, we came to find you, not to kill you." Rosa's eyes slightly moved, but his heart was still vigilant. The black-robed man leisurely said, "My lord sent me to communicate with you. I presume you have heard about the succession of the Pope. My lord hopes that you can fully support the new Pope." Rosa's expression changed. These words were too familiar. He had just read the contents of the secret letter, and this was the meaning behind it. Could it be? "Your lord? You are Richelieu's man?" Rosa's eyes were gloomy as he looked at the black-robed man. "No, no, no." The black-robed man shook his head. "Richelieu has pledged allegiance to my lord. So as his subordinates I hope that you can cooperate with him." Rosa was startled. "His Highness the Pope will pledge allegiance to your lord? Who is your lord?" "You wouldn't know, but my lord is a big shot from the inner wall." The black-robed man smiled. He didn't know much about Dean. He deliberately said that Dean was from the inner wall in order to deter Rosa. After all, Dean had given him the task of asking Bishop Rosa to support the new pope. The word invite was very particular, so it was up to him how he wanted to invite. Inner wall. Rosa was shocked. He felt the pressure in his heart. There was a great possibility that the person who was able to kidnap Richelieu was from the inner wall. After all, Richelieu's strength wasn't simple. At least as far as Rosa knew, the old man's strength was above the Light King. "Bishop Rosa, have you thought about it?" The black-robed man wasn't in a hurry. Rosa stared at him for a moment, then gritted his teeth. "The new pope is a member of your dark church. Letting him take the throne is tantamount to handing over the Holy Church to you dark believers. Don't even think about it. I won't agree even if I die." "Then die." The black-robed man shrugged and waved his hand. Whoosh, whoosh. The surrounding figures suddenly leaped up and pounced towards Rosa. Rosa was shocked, but he didn't panic. He retreated and hit the glass window behind him. Puff! A cold light suddenly pierced through the window at an incredible speed. Rosa turned pale with fright. He did not expect that there would be another person hiding outside the window without making a sound. Although his perception was not strong, it was not so weak that he could not detect someone at such a close distance. This could only mean that the other party was a terrifying assassin who was extremely good at hiding. The sharp blade pierced through his back, and pain instantly spread throughout his body. Rosa growled in pain and struck out with a backhand palm. With a bang, the withered old palm struck the black shadow outside the window. The black shadow let out a muffled groan, and his body flew out of the window, falling more than 10 meters down the stairs. Just as he was about to fall, he quickly grabbed the wall with his palm. There seemed to be a suction force in his palm, and he actually stuck to the wall like a spider. On the other side, when Rosa repelled the ambushers behind him, his body was obstructed, and he was immediately surrounded by several people around him. He glared angrily, and with a low growl, he slapped at one of the slender figures, trying to find a way to break through. This slender figure held a soft sword in her hand. As she moved, it was like countless silver snake heads swaying, pouncing towards Rosa's face. Rosa was unarmed and didn't dare to face the attack. He immediately retracted his hand. At the same time, he felt his strength rapidly draining. The pain in his back spread to his whole body in a short moment. He was just about to change his hand to defend when the pain surged to his arm. In an instant, like a cramp, his body stiffened. In this brief moment of stalemate, the pincer attack instantly hit Rosa. With a loud bang, Rosa's body flew out like a rag bag, smashing into the wall of the room. The huge oil painting hanging on the wall was also shaken off, and the dust fell on Rosa's face and hair, making him look extremely wretched. Rosa struggled to get up from the ground. His chest surged up, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood, splattering it on the expensive carpet. His face was red, and he looked up at the approaching black-robed man and the others. He was so angry that his beard and hair stood on end, but he couldn't exert any strength. He could only lie on the ground, trembling. "You're a human. Why do you have to fight with your life?" the black-robed man said with a smile. Rosa's eyes were about to split open as he stared at him. "If you want to kill me, then kill me. Pooey." He spat out a mouthful of blood, splattering it on the black-robed man's face. The surrounding people immediately drew their weapons and prepared to attack. The black-robed man immediately stopped them, and then raised his hand to slowly wipe the blood off his face. He ordered, "Go get a pen and paper." The person beside him immediately fetched it from the desk and handed it to him. Seeing this, Rosa immediately knew what they were going to do. He said angrily, "Even if I die, I won't let you do as you please. Don't even think about touching the Vatican." The black-robed man kicked his arm, and with a crack, his arm was instantly broken. He screamed in pain, but his body was still numb. Clearly, the blade that attacked earlier was highly toxic. "Cut off this arm," the black-robed man ordered. "Yes." The person beside him immediately drew his sword. Before Rosa could react, he felt a chill on his arm. His arm had been cut off. The black-robed man picked up the severed arm and said softly, "Even if you didn't come to the banquet, it's the same as sending your will. Lord Bishop, I'll send you to the embrace of your light God." Rosa glared angrily and cursed. The black-robed man turned around and slightly raised his hand. "Poo-pu." The sound of flesh being pierced rang out. Rosa, who was lying on the ground, had 4 swords stabbed into his body, nailing his body to the luxurious carpet. Blood flowed along the sharp blades. Carly was one of the 2 females among the 8 cardinals. She was 38 years old this year, and to be able to become a cardinal at this age was extremely impressive. She was the youngest among all the cardinals. Of course, this also had to do with the help of her family. After all, her grandfather was the 4th pope. "Madam Carly, have you finished writing?" On the sofa in the study sat a short old man. He carried a broadsword on his back and was wrapped in black cloth. In other places in the study stood 4 figures in black robe. Their auras were grave and stern, like 4 ghosts. At the feet of the short old man there were 2 corpses. One had its head cut off, and the other had its chest pierced through. The wound was extremely large. Many nobles recognized these 2 people. They were the personal attendants of Cardinal Carly. Although they were only attendants, in the eyes of many nobles they were still important figures. In front of the desk, Carly's hair was disheveled, and she sat on the chair with an ugly expression. She held a pen and struggled to write down the short old man's words. There was a bright red palm print on her beautiful cheek, and it was the short old man's hand. In the hands of the famous Sword King of the Dark Church, she had no power to fight back and could only obey. After a moment, Carly finally finished writing the letter. The pressure on her body seemed to have been lifted. She bit her lips. She knew that doing this meant that she had betrayed her faith, betrayed the Dark Church, and betrayed the great God of Light. But if she didn't do this, not only would she die, she would also implicate her family. She only hoped that the other cardinals could escape this calamity. As long as there was opposition, this puppet pope controlled by the Dark Church would not be able to ascend. "Let me see." The Sword King stretched out his hand. Carly picked up the written letter and slowly handed it to him. The Sword King glanced at it. His eyes narrowed and smiled. "The handwriting is very beautiful." Then he put away the letter. Carly's face was ugly. "I have done as you said, don't hurt the innocent." "Innocent?" The Sword King looked up at her. "When you killed my followers, didn't you think that they were also innocent? It's just that their preferences are a little different from yours." Carly knew that she was not qualified to reason with him. She gritted her teeth and bowed her head, not saying a word. "Now we still need you to come with us." The King of Swords stood up, patted the invisible dust off his body, and said, "How can there not be a bishop to support the new Pope's ascension? At that time you will also be able to see the Pope Richelieu that you have always been thinking about. He will give you an answer. I hope you won't be stupid. I can kill you at any time." Carly clenched her hands, her nails digging deep into her palms. She knew that she had no choice but to see Richelieu. There seemed to be a glimmer of hope. In another castle, Rados was sweating profusely. He quickly wrote the letter and handed it to the black-robed man in front of him. He squeezed out a smile and said, "Do you think this is okay?" The black-robed man glanced at the letter and put it away. He looked up at him mockingly and said, "I didn't expect that there would be such a weak existence among the cardinals. If the other cardinals were like you, it would save us a lot of trouble." Rados smiled and said, "You are right. What else do you need me to cooperate with? Just say it. Come with us." The black-robed man was too lazy to say more. He snorted and turned to walk outside. He lifted his feet and stepped over the several bleeding corpses on the ground. 2 hours after the end of the voting meeting, Barton followed Elnarin through St. Mark's Square and arrived in front of the Pope's Basilica. Barton looked up at the magnificent basilica, his face full of shock. It was the first time he had seen such a magnificent building. A solemn and sacred aura hit him in the face, making him feel deep veneration. All the distracting thoughts were instantly thrown to the back of his mind, and his heart was filled with devotion. "Come in." Elnarin led the way. Chapter 641. These people were dressed in luxurious clothes and stood in 2 rows. Their expressions were respectful and pious, as if they were praying for the commoners. The fluorescent stones taken from the bodies of the monsters emitted a holy and gentle radiance that illuminated the hall, as well as their bodies, faces, and even their eyelashes. In the gentle radiance, they exuded a solemn and holy aura. On the high steps behind these people stood a figure with a crown on his head and a scepter in his hand. He was an old man dressed in a gorgeous robe that looked like the stars and the moon. He had an elegant temperament and a gentle expression, but the white hair on his temples and his slightly sunken eyes made him look a little haggard. Barton's eyes widened as he saw the old man. He couldn't move his feet. Pope. Barton looked up at the old man. His heart was full of shock and indescribable awe. He didn't think that he would be able to see the great Pope with his own eyes. Richelieu looked down at the trembling boy, his eyes slightly narrowed. Although the latter was not handsome and did not have the slightest bit of outstanding qualities, he was surprised that he could get the trust of the suspicious Dean. The people in the 2 rows on the left and right turned to look at the young man. Their gazes were obscure and sharp, sizing him up. They wanted to see what was so special about him that he could become the new pope. However, after looking at him for a moment, everyone realized that he was just an ordinary apprentice knight. His appearance alone did not have any temperament at all. It must be known that most of the time, people did not know what was inside of them. They would often speculate about one's character and character through one's temperament and appearance. However, the appearance and temperament of this young man really could not match the identity of a pope. This was the first time Barton was being stared at by so many people. He felt his heartbeat quicken, as if there was a mountain pressing down on his body, making it hard for him to breathe. It was as if even the dark spots of radiation hidden under his clothes were exposed to the air, making him feel completely insecure. He was so nervous that his entire body was drenched in cold sweat, but he was too embarrassed to show it. He could only endure it and slowly walk into the hall under Elnarin's lead. Richelieu stared at Barton quietly. When Barton walked closer, a smile slowly appeared on his gentle face. "Mr. Barton, tomorrow is the day you will inherit the throne and become the new pope. Are you ready?" Barton's heart jumped as he heard Richelieu's words. He stammered, "Pope, I." Seeing his reaction, the people in the 2 rows beside him frowned slightly, but they all consciously lowered their heads and didn't show their displeasure. Richelieu raised his hand slightly and stopped him from speaking. He said softly, "You don't have to be nervous. When I was the Pope, I was just as nervous as you are. I couldn't even sleep for an entire night." At this point, he smiled lightly. The tense atmosphere in the hall immediately eased. The rest of the people looked at each other, thinking that it was true. If it were them, they would probably be trembling with nervousness and excitement. Barton saw his gentle demeanor and immediately felt a sense of familiarity. He nodded vigorously and said, "I understand." Richelieu smiled and said, "Tomorrow, when you are inaugurating the Pope, you will need to recite the Holy Bible. You will have to prepare for this tonight. In addition, there will be many nobles and military leaders coming to watch the ceremony. Don't make a mistake during the ceremony. Do you understand?" Barton was shocked. "I have to read the Holy Bible?" He did not know many words, and most of them had been adapted in recent years. The Holy Bible was written earlier, so it was written in ancient characters. He might not be able to read them all. Wouldn't it be awkward if he did not know how to read halfway? Richelieu's eyes flashed. "Don't worry. You only need to choose one of them to read. You don't have to read the whole thing. I will send someone to guide you tonight." Barton heaved a sigh of relief. He was about to say that was great, but he felt that it was too casual. "Thank you, Your Highness. The ceremony will be held tonight. Familiarize yourself with it first," Richelieu said gently. He then turned to the 2 rows of people next to him and said, "For the inauguration ceremony tomorrow, everyone, do not make any mistakes. All the documents must be prepared. There is no room for sloppiness in this matter, understand?" As he said this, his expression became extremely stern. He did not have the slightest bit of gentleness toward Barton. "Yes." Everyone replied in unison. Elnarin also responded, but he sighed in his heart. He knew that it was a done deal, and there was nothing he could do to change it. However, this was not the worst thing that could happen to him. He guessed that the other bishops had agreed to it because this kid was at least better than Richelieu being the Pope. When Richelieu's foundation was not stable, he could be a mere figurehead. He could even plunder a lot of resources for his own use. This was something that Richelieu could not do when he was the Pope. Secondly, this kid was too ordinary. Even if he received the resources of the Church in the future, he would not be able to achieve much in a short period of time. The chances of replacing him in the future were much higher than replacing Richelieu. From these aspects, this was a great advantage. Thinking of this, he felt relieved. He suddenly felt that this kid was much more pleasing to the eye. The night passed in the blink of an eye. The light church's St. Mark's Square carried out the rehearsal for the ceremony the entire night. Chapter 642. Dean's eyes gradually focused as he noticed Richelieu's arrival. He looked up at Richelieu. "How is the ceremony going?" "It's in progress. There won't be any mistakes. Don't worry, Elder." Richelieu bowed his head in a humble tone. He had put down his identity and was respectful towards Dean. Dean nodded slightly. "Let him read the speech we prepared in advance after the ceremony is over." "I will." Richelieu nodded. Dean slowly retracted his eyes and looked at the ground. His thoughts drifted away again. Richelieu peeked at Dean. He saw that there was nothing else for him to do, so he slowly retreated. When the sun gradually became brighter, the ceremony also came to an end. Barton stood alone on the altar, facing the gazes coming from all directions. Although he was nervous, all his attention was focused on the Bible in his hands, so he didn't seem so awkward. The Bible was very thick, but when he opened it, there was another layer of paper. On it were the new words that Teacher Guyot had translated from the ancient language of the Bible last night. He had read it through twice last night without missing a word. At this moment, although he was a little nervous, he did not make any mistakes. No one knew that at such a solemn moment, the person who was devoutly reading the universal love psalms on the stage was thinking about not making any mistakes. A moment later, Barton finally finished reading the Bible. Barton heaved a sigh of relief and closed the Bible. Only then did he feel that his hands were a little stiff and strenuous. He raised his head and looked forward. Suddenly, he saw countless black heads and the gazes of the distinguished people in the front row. These gazes seemed to be able to see through everything and see through all of his secrets. At this time, Richelieu led two old men in white robes onto the stage. Both of them were holding a tray with the Pope's scepter and the Holy Crown. Richelieu's face was solemn and his steps were steady as he approached Barton step by step. It was the first time for Barton to see such a serious Pope. He was nervous and didn't know what to do. Richelieu looked at the timidity and awkwardness in the boy's eyes. There was a burst of melancholy and sadness in his heart. Although this matter was carried out under Dean's plan, he never thought that the person who would replace him as the new Pope would be such a young boy. He felt somewhat ashamed of the previous popes and the mountain that he once cherished. After a moment of silence, when the preaching bell rang, Richelieu came to his senses. He put away the distracting thoughts in his mind and followed the ritual. As he recited the eulogy and exhortations, he handed the scepter and crown that had accompanied him for many years to Barton. Barton was originally wearing a white hat that covered his black hair. When Richelieu crowned him, he did not take off the white hat. Instead, he put it on. Although people with ulterior motives would find this scene strange, most people had not seen the grand occasion of the coronation of the Pope, nor did they know the traditions of the luminous Church, so they did not pay much attention to it. In the blink of an eye, Barton had donned the luxurious and noble robe of the Pope, as well as the crown that represented holiness and truth. He held the scepter that the God of Light had bestowed upon him as he stood on the high altar. Although his eyes were filled with nervousness and unease, his dignified appearance and temperament had already been revealed. A tsunami of cheers erupted from the square, spreading like waves. Barton's heart gradually sprouted confidence as he saw the cheers. It was an unprecedented experience. Amidst the cheers, Richelieu handed the scroll in his hand to Barton and said in a low voice, You are now the new pope. According to the rules, you have to state your views on the future of the luminous church, as well as attack the cult of shadows. After you have finished, you should express your blessings. Barton was startled for a moment and immediately put it away. When the cheers ended, Barton coughed lightly and summoned his courage. He opened the scroll and roughly scanned it. After knowing the general content, he immediately read it from the beginning. Countless people in the square listened attentively. This was the main purpose of their visit today. I declare that from today onwards, the asylum tax of the Holy Church will be reduced by half. From today onwards, all poor towns and villages can apply to the Holy Church for poverty alleviation. Barton's voice was rough as he tried to spread his words as far as possible. The second point, from today onwards, for the next 5 years, all criminals who disrupt the governance of the Holy Church and slight the Holy Church will be pardoned. There was a thunderous cheer from the audience. The military general sitting in the front row, the head of the branch of the magistrate, and the legendary knight of the Hall of Knights were stunned. This first grace was too generous. How much money would be lost if the asylum tax was reduced by half? It was at least equal to the entire annual income of a consortium. As for the second point, it was within their expectations. Most of the popes who succeeded the throne would carry out a series of pardons to show tolerance. The third point is to restore the identity of the legendary genius Dean from the Temple of Elements. Master Dean was framed by the Dark Church. After a detailed investigation, Master Dean's innocence has been found. His identity will be restored. Barton was excited as he read until here. He was worried about Dean when he was banned. He didn't expect that the ban would be lifted. The fourth point, the poverty alleviation program, will be launched in the blink of an eye. Barton read out 6 points in one breath. He put away the scroll. Chapter 643. Inner Wall. A side hall of the monastery. Elder, an urgent letter has been sent from the outer wall. A middle-aged man dressed in a pure white Taoist robe said respectfully in a low voice. At the same time, he presented the black letter with both hands. Stuart, who was dealing with several documents, frowned as he raised his hand to take the letter. The middle-aged man immediately stepped forward and handed the letter to him. Opening the black letter, Stuart quickly scanned through it. His aged eyes narrowed slightly as a cold glint flashed across them. That old bastard Richelieu actually dared to pass on the position of Pope without permission? He has been the Pope for so many years. Does he think that his wings are hard? Elder, I think there is a reason for this. The middle-aged man bowed his head. Stuart's eyebrows twitched. The 5 supervisors didn't send any news back? How can they not know about such a big thing? Or have they already been killed? The middle-aged man bowed his head even deeper. I think so too. Stuart slowly raised his head and looked into the distance. He was kneading the secret letter in his hand. The person who can quietly kill the 5 supervisors and control Richelieu is at least a master who is at the level of a pioneer. What is the reaction of the other forces? Can you speculate which force has secretly intervened in the outer wall? This subordinate is still investigating this point, the middle-aged man said in a low voice. Stuart stared at the middle-aged man for a moment. He slowly moved his eyes away. Let Delphine take Francis to the outer wall to investigate. Although this is a barbarian land eroded by radiation, but it is an important part of our strategic deployment. We can't let others easily plunder it. Not to mention, we have to cut off his hand. Yes. The middle-aged man bowed his head in response. The name of the new Pope, Barton, was published in major newspapers after the ceremony. It spread to all corners of the outer wall. Except for the underground miners in the slums and the adventurers who went out to the radiation zone, almost everyone knew about his name. Accompanied by Richelieu, Barton nervously dealt with the important figures sent by the various factions. Then, he was brought by Richelieu to the Holy Radiant Basilica where the Pope resided, which was also where Richelieu used to live. As soon as he entered the holy radiant palace, Barton saw a familiar figure sitting on a throne before he even had the time to marvel at the magnificence of this resting palace. However, although the latter's face was familiar, the temperament he exuded was completely different from the kind youth in his memory. Nevertheless, he didn't think too much about it as he excitedly ran over. "Dean, I really became the Pope. Presumptuous." Sergei, who was standing next to Dean, shouted, "How did you address my young master?" Dean slightly raised his hand to indicate that it didn't matter. Barton was startled for a moment, but he reacted. The strong joy and excitement in his heart suddenly sobered up. He suddenly remembered that this scene was expected by Dean 7 days ago. In other words, all of this was arranged by him. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel a deep awe in his heart. He had seen the shocking scene of countless people looking up at him. He clearly knew how noble and great the position he was sitting in was. But such a great position seemed insignificant in front of Dean. "Master." Barton bowed his head and called out the same way he did when he was training at the Ryan family. "You and I are friends. You don't have to be like this." Dean waved his hand. Barton wasn't an ignorant kid anymore. He shook his head. "Master, it's my honor that you are willing to let me be your brother. If it wasn't for you, then there wouldn't be me today. You will always be my loyal master." He bowed his head and saluted. Dean got up and held Barton's arm. "You will always be my brother. It's my honor that you are willing to believe in me." Barton's eyes were wet as he looked at Dean's sincere eyes. Sergei couldn't help but secretly shake his head as he saw Dean's abnormal appearance. "Hypocrite! Shameless!" Dean said. "Today I came to find you mainly to protect you." "Protect me?" Barton was startled. He suddenly felt nervous in his heart. Richelieu's eyes lit up as he silently looked at Barton. Dean stared at him. "You should know the truth of equivalence between effort and gain. To be honest, I've thought for a long time about letting you sit in this position. It's not easy to be the Pope. You have to face assassinations from the dark believers and other forces. Mr. Richelieu should be very clear about this point. Don't you think so?" Richelieu looked at Sergei and then looked at Barton. "Yes, honor and sacrifice coexist. You have to be ready to sacrifice at any time to get this honor." Barton was a bit nervous as he heard Dean's words. He was too embarrassed to show it. However, he couldn't hide his thoughts due to his experience. Dean stared at him. "Mr. Richelieu is right. If you want to wear the crown, you have to bear its weight. Are you afraid?" Barton looked at Dean's deep eyes. He felt a trace of courage in his chest. He gritted his teeth. "I'm not afraid." Dean patted his shoulder. "Well, you don't have to worry about me. I'm here to protect you. No one can hurt you unless I die." Barton was touched. "Don't say that. I'm the one who will die. You gave me my life. If I sacrifice myself for you, then at least I'll repay the kindness." "Repay kindness." Dean silently muttered these two words in his heart. At the same time, he expressed his gratitude to one person. It was Aunt Di from the Mission orphanage. Aunt Di was the one who taught the idea of repaying kindness to the orphans. "Send an order to the Temple of Elements. Tell them that you have invited me to come over to discuss about the invention so that I can live here and protect you in the future," Dean said. Barton nodded. Richelieu secretly sighed. He knew that Dean was going to extend his fingers to the core institution of the Holy Church, the Temple of Elements. That night, the business district was ablaze with lights. All the taverns and streets, as well as families eating, were talking about the change of the Pope. The 6 reforms announced by Barton were especially discussed by many squires, nobles, and wealthy merchants. The young ladies and nobles were more curious about Barton's age, appearance, and other information. "The new Pope is indeed as great as Master Antonius sang. From today onwards, our lives will at least be twice as rich. Yes, the Holy Church is much stronger than the military. Every year there is a war and they ask for money. The military is just a fart. They are the ones who pull the nobles into a fight. How disgusting. Shoo. Keep your voice down. If the military finds out, then they will put you in the dungeon. You're right. Let's talk about the new pope. I heard that a legendary knight of the Hall of Knights has publicly praised the new pope's greatness. I heard that this new pope is still very young. TSK. He has such talent and glory at such a young age. He is even more terrifying than the legendary genius Dean. They are all young heroes. That's right. I thought that the genius in theurgy was already a rare figure in 100 years. I didn't expect the new pope to be the same. But why haven't I heard any news about him before? What do you know? The Holy Church must have trained him to be the next pope. How could they expose him so easily? Yes, if the Dark Church knew that such a character would be the next pope, then they would send people to assassinate him every day. Brother, you are the one who sees through everything. You flatter me. Everyone, let's toast to this great new pope. Cheers. Chapter 644. Barton's Tax Reduction Treaty made the outer wall fall into a sea of cheers. In this era of clear class system, the tax burden was far more than the imagination of ordinary people. At this moment no one would protest against the fact that the new pope succeeded the throne. However, the military and the Knights' Hall were an exception. What does the Holy Church want to do this time? Tax reduction? Do they want to use this method to gather people's hearts? The three commanders-in-chief were sitting in the conference room of the military headquarters. Many generals and staff were sitting in the hall. Some were worried, some were deep, and some were lost in thought. According to the latest intelligence, I've found the identity of this new pope. If I tell you, you'll probably think that I'm joking. A bearded 5-star general looked around at the crowd with a hint of mockery and coldness on his face. Don't keep me guessing, just say it. What identity? The bearded general indifferently said. The kid called Barton isn't a noble. He hasn't been crowned with a knight medal. In fact, he is an orphan from the slums. I have found the orphanage where he came from and verified his identity. What? What are you talking about? He is from the slums. Everyone was dumbfounded as they looked at the bearded general in disbelief. This reaction was completely within the expectations of the bearded general. When he first received the news, his reaction was exactly the same as theirs. However, at this moment, he only felt a trace of ridicule in his heart. He did not think that his peers were ridiculous, but he thought that the luminous Curia's actions were ridiculous. They actually allowed a lowly commoner to become the pope. No one would believe this. He is an orphan from the slums. How can he join the Holy Church? A female general frowned. The bearded general shrugged slightly. Didn't the luminous Vatican change their recruitment rules a few years ago? As long as you're from a noble family, you can skip the examination and enter the apprenticeship stage. Before he entered the Vatican, he was adopted by a desolate noble. As for why this desolate noble adopted such a lowly person, no one knows. Didn't you ask? I can't ask a dead person. They are dead. By the time my men arrived, they had already been dead for a long time. Their entire family was killed, and even their children were not spared. Not a single person was left alive, including their distant relatives who came to visit them. Unfortunately, they were also killed, the bearded general said indifferently. Another general, who was as burly as a bear, had a gloomy expression on his face as he said in a low voice, "In that case, they were silenced." It looks like all of this was a meticulously prepared plan. What kind of conspiracy is the Vatican up to? Why would Richelieu support a peasant from the slums to succeed the throne? Isn't he afraid of blasphemy? It's not the first or second day that the Light Church has blasphemed God. They use the name of God to educate the commoners and extort their wealth. How despicable! The female general from before said coldly. I don't agree with you. Another blonde general said in an unhappy tone. although the Vatican has gone too far in some places. But the outer wall wouldn't be so peaceful if the Vatican didn't spread the energy of justice for so many years. The plague and poverty would bring riot. The Vatican has pacified the emotions of the commoners. This is something that we soldiers can never do. We can't point spears at everyone and tell them not to fight or they will be punished. The female general sneered. Are you sure that the people who spread the energy of justice are the righteous people? We didn't use the spears to frighten the commoners. Do you think there would be riots if there wasn't a Knight of Light patrolling the area? That's nonsense, the blonde general angrily said. Who said that the people who spread the energy of justice must be the righteous people? Even if the Pope's purpose is out of interest, at least the things he does have a good impact on the people. That's enough. Enough. An 80-year-old commander raised his hand to stop the quarrel between the two. The contribution of the Holy Church is undeniable. But the Holy Church has become more and more unscrupulous over the years. Behind any power there is the word interest. The Holy Church is no exception. We have suffered losses in the hands of the Holy Church. If the Holy Church continues to expand, then the nobles and civilians will fall to their side. At that time we can only look up to the Holy Church as the security of the outer wall. Your words are too serious. Another white-haired elder beside him smiled calmly. What can the commoners do? Even if they all become believers of the Church, what can they do? Do they dare to overturn the heavens? Why not? I don't think we can underestimate the power of the commoners. Although they are weak, but their numbers are huge. If they gather together, then they may become a force that can shake us. The previous commander-in-chief said in a deep voice. You are worrying too much. The white-haired old man chuckled. Let's not say that the commoners won't dare to do so. Even if they listen to the words of the Vatican, they will only be digging their own grave. Do you think that the Iron Lion Crusaders will be afraid of these unarmed civilians? Sooner or later they will suffer a big loss, the old man said in an angry tone. I agree. A general echoed. The white-haired old man glanced at him and indifferently said, Instead of caring about these lowly civilians, it's better to talk about the Holy Church. This time they are going to elect a new pope. I'm most worried about the inner wall behind the Holy Church. If they are guided by the inner wall, then this matter will be troublesome. Hearing his words, everyone looked at each other, and their faces darkened. Commander, if the Vatican is interfering with the inner wall, then should we apply to the garrison of the inner wall to send reinforcements? The previous female general asked. The white-haired old man sneered. Nothing has happened yet. Do you want to set off a war in the inner wall? The old man who was sitting next to him was silent. He didn't agree nor refuse. There was a trace of disappointment in the female general's eyes as she heard his words. She sighed in her heart. She knew that the military always hated to ask for reinforcements from the inner wall. Even the last time when the barbarians invaded the border and broke through the fortress, the military didn't ask for reinforcements from the inner wall. The reason for this was that many generals were opposed to asking for reinforcements. They knew that once the inner wall sent reinforcements, they would face the possibility of being reshuffled. Especially the three commanders-in-chief. They would face the possibility of being ruled by the Vatican. They would no longer be supreme. I think we should use our eyes to investigate the details of the situation. Let's see what the Vatican is going to do. The previous bearded general opened his mouth and broke the deadlock. Someone immediately seconded the idea. While the military was having a meeting, an angry roar shook the walls of the Hall of Knights conference hall. Bori, are you a spy sent by the Holy Church? Who allowed you to represent the entire Knights Hall to support the Holy Church? Do you want to drag the Knights Hall into the muddy water? The one who spoke was a white-haired old man. He was the Lord of the Knights Hall, Vic Jones. Everyone coldly looked at the skinny old man. They were waiting for his explanation. Bori smiled bitterly. He knew this would happen when he used his identity as a legendary knight to commend the new pope. He silently thought about his words and said, "My lord, I'm not representing the entire Hall of Knights. I'm only representing myself. I've seen the new Pope's resume, and I think he's a good man. He'll be an outstanding Pope in the future. That's why I'm commending him." Chapter 645. Beauvais replied in a hurry, "Lord, it's not that serious. Besides, even if the inner wall takes action, we can take the initiative to show our goodwill. What's the harm?" "Stupid. Do you think that the military and the magistrate wouldn't take action if the Holy Church is behind the inner wall?" Victor Jones looked at him angrily. "They have big forces in the inner wall behind them. Although the Knights' Hall is famous in the outer wall, but our foundation in the inner wall is shallow. We can't compare with them at all. Once they heat up the war in the inner wall through the outer wall, we will be the first to suffer." Beauvais was stunned. The other elders were surprised. They had never heard him talk about such a secret before. Victor looked at Beauvais' reaction and didn't hide anymore. "The Knights' Hall has been making friends with all parties for so many years. We have the love of the nobles in the outer wall and the respect of the Holy Church. Even the military doesn't dare to look down on us. On the surface it seems that we are very strong and we are the faith of all the knights. But why haven't we actively developed our forces for so many years? It's not because we believe in the rules that we shouldn't fight with people for no reason. It's because our foundation isn't as strong as theirs." Beauvais' face slightly changed as he heard Victor's words. He didn't think that there would be such a secret. What he didn't expect was that it wasn't the rules that they respected and believed in but the most tacky and straightforward things. They weren't strong enough. The next day, Dean returned to the Temple of Elements. His appearance aroused countless onlookers and cheers. The Temple of Elements was the most excited when Barton succeeded as the Pope. Since Dean was arrested on charges of colluding with dark believers, the overall atmosphere of the Temple of Elements had been in a depressed state. Their image in the outside world had declined a lot. Even if there was a gag rule, the mages would talk about this matter in private. After all, they couldn't forget this person. No matter what kind of invention, they couldn't help but talk about this person. Especially the wood and lightning mages. After Dean left, they had been studying the principles of wood and lightning rods that Dean had left behind. The name Dean had become a monumental monument that couldn't be bypassed on the path of a mage. Although air magic was banned, there were still many mages who were interested in air magic and secretly studied it in their castles. After all, this was a completely different world, and its charm was unparalleled. "Master Dew! Master Dean! Teacher! Teacher!" Dean heard a different name in the shouts of support. He looked at the source of the voice and saw a small figure desperately squeezing in the crowd. His mouth kept calling teacher, but the voice was drowned out by the crowd. If it was not for his amazing hearing, he would not have noticed it. Dudyan remembered that he was a student of the inner wall. His name was Edward. "Teacher!" Edward squeezed forward with all his might, afraid that he would miss this opportunity. Dudyan walked towards Edward. The crowd quickly separated, revealing Edward, who was desperately trying to squeeze out. "Teacher!" Edward looked at Dudyan, who was close to him. He was so excited that he almost shed tears. His face was flushed. Dudyan saw his expression and knew that it wasn't just tears of joy. He asked, "Did I suffer grievances after I left?" Tears rolled down from Edward's eyes. He didn't expect that Dudyan's first words would directly hit his heart. He felt that all the grievances and pain were nothing at this moment. He raised his hand to wipe the tears that rolled down from his cheeks. "No, teacher, I didn't suffer grievances." Dudyan quietly looked at him but didn't ask further. "From now on, you won't suffer grievances anymore. You can consider the grievances I suffered when I left as a growth experience." "Yes, teacher." Edward nodded. There was a trace of determination in his wet eyes. Dudyan patted his shoulder. "Follow me." "Yes, teacher," Edward firmly replied. Dudian held Aisha's hand as they slowly walked along the Temple of Elements. They passed by a building and went down the mountain. They didn't go to meet the masters in the castle. Edward followed Dudian to get into the carriage. Dudian and Aisha sat in the carriage. Edward sat next to Dudian. Dudian asked about his life during this period of time. Dean listened quietly. It was almost the same as what he thought. Because of his bad reputation when he was arrested, the child became a laughingstock for everyone. Especially the people who lived with him. They made fun of him every day. Even if he wanted to close the door to study his experiments, he was just a junior mage. He was forced to live in the same room with other people. He didn't have a separate castle. Moreover, he had to apply for the resources to produce the inventions. He met a lot of obstacles. His life was extremely bitter and sullen. No one was willing to teach him new knowledge. After all, his identity as a teacher was too sensitive. Dean looked at the scenery outside the carriage, and quietly looked into the distance. Edward followed Dudian's gaze. His thoughts drifted away as he passed by the mountains and buildings. He suddenly felt that there was no difficulty that could not be overcome. The world was very big, and he had to rely on his own efforts to control his own destiny. Dudian took Edward to the holy temple where Barton lived. At the same time he asked Sergei to move some of his luggage. The luggage was nothing more than experimental materials that he needed. The holy temple was very big and Dudian occupied most of the area. Dudian sent Edward to live in the side hall outside the mountain. Chapter 646. Barton was startled when he heard Dean's words. There was an inexplicable throbbing in his heart. He looked at his partner who used to eat in the same broken cafeteria. He suddenly found that Dean had become somewhat strange. He didn't have the vitality of an 18-year-old teenager. He was like a piece of frozen ice that couldn't be eroded or warmed up. He thought of the days they had experienced together. There was a kind of sadness in his heart. He reluctantly smiled. Since it hurts the lungs, it's better not to smoke. Dean gently took a puff and slowly exhaled. The smoke curled up. He was silent. Barton stared at him and said in a low voice, "Young master, you've been alone all this time. It must have been very hard for you. But now that we're standing at the top and have obtained what countless people dream of, no one will be able to hurt us anymore. There is no such thing as obtaining. I have been losing, and it will continue until the end of my life." Dean muttered to himself. Barton felt sad, but he didn't know where this sadness came from. He didn't understand why Dean would say such words. He didn't know why Dean would be so depressed. It was as if there was an invisible gap in front of them. It was as if there were two worlds. The world where Dean was standing was so close, but it was as if he could never reach it. He fell into silence. He didn't know what to say. After a long time, he thought of something. His eyes lit up and he immediately said, "Master, let's pick up Joseph. He is alone in the military without anyone to take care of him. It should be very difficult for him." Dean's blurred eyes gradually became clear. He gently pinched the cigarette butt and flicked it out of the window. He turned his back to Barton. "Joseph has his task. He will come back to us soon." Barton slightly opened his mouth. He wanted to say something, but he held back. St. Mark's Square was as bright as day. The stone pillars on all sides were hung high with street lamp. The stone pillars were embedded with fluorescent stones. The ground of the square was illuminated. Dean opened the wooden box. There was a piece of fresh meat dripping with blood. The strong fishy smell made Aisha slightly agitated. The corner of her mouth slightly opened, as if saliva was secreting. Dean took out the knife next to him, cut a small piece of meat with a fork and passed it to her mouth. Aisha's body slightly trembled, but she didn't immediately open her mouth to eat. Dean's eyes were gentle as he gently shook the bell on his wrist. The bell issued a short and regular jingle. After hearing this sound, Aisha immediately opened her mouth and bit the meat on the fork. Her white and flat teeth had now become somewhat sharp. She gobbled up the meat, and the excess blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth. She looked slightly ferocious. Dean slowly cut off another piece of flesh and gently brought it to her mouth. One piece after another, Aisha quickly chewed and swallowed. Dean poured a glass of cold water and handed it to her. He let her open her mouth and drink it. After these days of getting along, he had basically grasped the type of food Aisha ate. Her main food was raw meat. The fresher the better. As for the type of meat, it didn't matter. Just like the piece of meat in front of him, it was a piece of beef. If she was fed roasted meat, she would definitely have diarrhea afterward. Moreover, because the instruction hadn't trained her to this stage, she would often poop it out unconsciously when she had diarrhea and dirty her clothes. In addition, Dean would also give her water to drink. In his concept, even if Aisha was a corpse, her body still needed to replenish water. However, she couldn't drink hot water. Otherwise, there would be bubbles in her body. Although it wouldn't have any impact on her combat effectiveness and actions, it would make her appearance change greatly. She would become hideous and ugly. Dean found that although she didn't need to drink water and wasn't hungry for water, but if she didn't drink water her skin would become dry and cold. After a moment, a piece of fresh beef was eaten. Dean gently patted Aisha's back so that she wouldn't choke. Although he knew that she wouldn't choke, he still couldn't help but do so. "Take a break. We'll take a bath later," Dean whispered to her. Aisha was silent. Her red lips were stained with blood. She looked like a cold vampire. Dean held her hand and looked at her tenderly. This time of the day was the most relaxing time for him. So he couldn't help but talk more. "I'll find a way to save you after I rule the inner wall. They must have a way in this area. After you recover, I'll take you to a faraway place to live. I'll take you to my hometown. I'll take you to see the scenery of my hometown. I'll take you to see the sea. We'll live by the sea and slowly grow old," Dean said softly. Suddenly, Aisha's mouth slightly moved. There was a trace of light in her pure black eyes. Seeing this scene, Dean was slightly startled, and then an unbelievable thought came to his mind. Could it be that she could hear his words, and her consciousness had recovered? He couldn't help but tremble with excitement. His eyes were moist. But soon the beautiful fantasy was broken. Aisha suddenly stood up and flew out like a sharp sword. She disappeared in front of Dean's eyes. Dean was stunned for a moment. He turned his head and saw Aisha jump into the back of the temple. There was a bottomless cliff there. His pupils constricted, and he quickly chased after them. In his urgency, he automatically activated his thermal vision, and the world in front of him immediately changed. He saw 2 heat sources hidden under the window of the cliff, and they were climbing up. Sneak attack? Dudian was startled. The excitement and fantasy that had just emerged in his heart were suddenly shattered. Chapter 647. Whoosh, whoosh. At this time, several figures rushed out of the broken window and saw the scene in the hall. They couldn't help but be stunned on the spot. Dean turned to look at them. He recognized Francis as the leader of the Saints squad. He was the one who had brought him into the inner wall. "Roar!" Aisha growled and shook off the black-robed woman who had lost her life. She turned her head and stared at Francis and the others ferociously. Her body flashed and appeared in front of Francis and the others in an instant. Her hand passed through the throat of a burly young saint. The latter didn't even have time to react. His eyes were wide open. Dean quickly raised his hand and shook the bell. Aisha, who was about to pounce on the others, suddenly stopped her body with 3 thumps. Francis and others woke up. They felt as if they had fallen into an ice cave. Their bodies shivered slightly. Aisha, who had pierced her companion's throat, gave them a mountain-like pressure. Francis's throat was stiff. His eyes slowly climbed to Aisha's face. His pupils shrank as he looked at Aisha's face. It was followed by fear, as if he had seen the end of the world. "How could this person be here? Did the monastery send you?" Dudian asked. Francis's eyes were glued to Aisha's body. He turned his head and looked at Dean next to him. The horror on his face turned into astonishment. It's you? How can you be here? This is my territory. Who else can be here except me? Dean wasn't in a hurry to kill them. The monastery had sent a pioneer and 5 saints, which was beyond his expectation. He thought that they would send at most a few saints. He didn't expect that they would directly send a pioneer. It was not like the situation in the fairy tale where the main character kept sending the minions as practice targets. Then the main character would become stronger all the way and grow up to hang the villain boss. Your territory? Francis was dumbfounded. He turned his head and looked at Aisha. Aisha's face was expressionless, and her pupils were completely black. He felt a trace of familiarity with this scene, but he couldn't remember where he had seen such a similar situation. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside. Richelieu was the first to rush into the hall. He saw the messy scene and the corpses on the ground. His face changed. The next moment, his eyes fell on Francis and the others. He was startled for a moment and immediately rushed to Dean's side. He asked with concern, "Master, are you okay?" Dean indifferently said, "It's okay. Ask the guards outside to retreat. Tell them that the assassin has been dealt with." "Yes." Richelieu nodded respectfully. Before he left, he glanced at Francis. He knew that they were all going to die here. He sighed in disappointment. Francis looked at Richelieu, who had jogged over and then retreated respectfully. His eyes widened in disbelief. How could he be like this? "What did the monastery say when they sent you here?" Dudyan said in an indifferent tone. "If you tell the truth, I may let you live." Francis looked at the legendary girl next to him, and then at Dean. His heart was full of shock. He hurriedly said, "We are old acquaintances. Today was a misunderstanding. We just came to check the situation of the outer wall. We have no malice." Francis squeezed out a kind smile. Dean lived in the Holy Temple where only the Pope could live. It was obvious that the change in the outer wall was caused by this teenager who was once a prisoner. Moreover, there was a legendary girl next to him. Could it be that the dragon family was ready to take control of the outer wall and start a war with the monastery? The monastery is aware of the change of the Pope. They sent you here to assassinate the new Pope and capture Richelieu. Dean indifferently said, "Don't play tricks with me. I just want to know the current situation of the monastery and the current situation of the inner wall." Francis's face slightly changed as he saw that Dudyan had expected everything. He was impressed by the youth's intelligence last time. He knew that Dudyan wouldn't give up today. He immediately said, "You have basically told us everything we know. As for the situation in the inner wall, I don't know what you want to know. I don't know where to start. The matters of the Monster Research Institute, the Dragon family, the nobles of the inner wall and the monastery." Dudyan said in a cold voice, "Tell me everything you know. The one who says more will live." Francis's face changed as he felt the commotion behind him. He knew that Dean was ruthless and merciless. Moreover, the legendary girl was next to him. It was impossible for him to escape. He immediately said, "I'll say that the dragon family hasn't had any major events recently." "Oh yes, the dragon family has replaced the Saintess." He looked at Aisha, who was next to him. "Continue." Yes, after a while, Francis finished his story. Dean looked at the people behind him. "Is there anything else to add?" They looked at each other as they didn't know how to answer. Dean slowly walked past one of the youths. The youth didn't have time to relax as he felt a pain in his neck. His consciousness was cut off and his body softly fell down. "You!" The other two clenched their weapons in anger as they saw Dean attack the youth. They wanted to attack but held back. Dean swung the dagger and said in a cold voice, "Is there anything to add?" The two of them looked at each other. One of the women said, "If we tell you, will you really let us go?" "Of course." Dean indifferently said, "I always mean what I say." The woman gritted her teeth. Captain didn't say anything about the core of the monastery. I can add that the monastery has spent a lot of effort to control the outer wall. The first reason is that a legendary preacher of the monastery left a notice to educate the barbarians. The second reason is that the population of the outer wall isn't small. Although the conditions are bad, but the population is close to the population of the inner wall. So we have included the outer wall into the strategic deployment area of the monastery. I don't know about the specific deployment, but it seems that we are preparing for the future battle. Why didn't you send saints over? Dean asked. Yes. The woman said, we sent 5 supervisors. Such a force is enough to monitor the outer wall. I didn't expect them to be destroyed. Dean nodded and looked at the other young man. Do you have anything to add? The young man's face was pale. I want to say the same as them. What about you? Only one of you can live. Dean looked at Francis. Francis was in a cold sweat. His mood was complex and contradictory. The people behind him were his brothers who had gone through life and death with him. I'll talk. Francis clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and said, we have told you everything we know. I also know that the Elder's magic mark is the legendary Shadow Hunter. Francis, you. The 2 men behind him glared at him, their faces flushed with anger. Chapter 648. Aisha, who was motionless, roared as she heard the bell. She rushed towards Francis and the other 2. Francis was shocked and hurriedly raised his hand to block the attack. But as soon as he raised his arm, he felt a sharp object piercing through his chest. His body was violently thrown out and smashed onto the floor. Didn't you say? He panicked and was ready to climb up from the ground while angrily questioning Dean next to him. But before he could finish his words, a black shadow appeared in his line of sight. With a bang, Francis' head was twisted off and his body fell to the ground. His expression was still extremely angry as he stared at the ground. In the blink of an eye, 3 people were beheaded by Aisha. They didn't have the strength to fight back. Dean shook the bell in time to stop Aisha from grabbing one of them. He took out a handkerchief and helped her wipe the blood from her mouth and fingers, but there were still bloodstains on her hands. He turned and called Richelieu, who was guarding the entrance of the hall. Tell people to come and clean up their bodies. Tell them that the Dark Believers attacked the Pope. Parade them in the streets and burn them in public. Richelieu nodded as he looked at the corpses on the ground. He didn't expect the saints sent by the inner wall to die so quickly. They didn't even hurt Dean's hair. All of this was done by the woman who was always by Dean's side. She was definitely the strongest line of defense around him. She was the most dangerous and the most beautiful line of defense. Barton got the news after Richelieu left. He was relieved to see that Dean wasn't injured, but he noticed the corpses on the ground and the broken windows. He was surprised. Master, are you okay? Did they come to assassinate me? Yes. Dean nodded. Barton still had a lingering fear in his heart. He didn't think that these people would be able to climb up the cliff behind the temple. If he lived here alone, he would have probably been beheaded a long time ago. Fortunately, Master, you are here, otherwise He thanked Duddian. Although he knew that he wouldn't have been assassinated if he wasn't the pontiff, but it was a fact that Duddian saved his life again. Dean slightly waved his hand. The person who wants to hurt you is my enemy. This matter is also caused by me. It's getting late. Go to sleep. I'll deal with it. Barton looked at the corpses on the ground. The pungent smell of blood made his stomach churn, and he felt like vomiting, but he forced himself to endure it. He thought to himself, how can I sleep after such a big thing happened tonight? Although he thought about it, he still agreed and left the place. It really took courage to stay with a few corpses. You worked hard. Dean took Aisha back to the chair after Barton left. The coldness on his face had melted. He touched her cold hands. Next time they will send stronger people. Fortunately, you are by my side. Aisha was expressionless and didn't speak. After a while, Richelieu brought a team of Knights of Light into the hall. They dragged the corpses away and dealt with them. They called the servants to clean the ground several times to disperse the smell of blood. Dean took clean water and washed Aisha's fingers and lips. He took her to the other side of the hall and sat down. He estimated that it was almost time for the other forces to take action. The corpses of Francis and the others were escorted by the Knights of Light and paraded through the street. Countless passers-by gathered and pointed at the corpses. The news of the Pope's assassination spread to the military headquarters and the Knights' Hall. "General, I've personally looked at the corpses. The faces of the Dark Believers were destroyed and couldn't be identified. Their deaths were tragic. It wasn't caused by weapons. It seems like they were forcibly torn apart by something." "Forcibly torn apart?" "Yes, I also asked someone to secretly shoot arrows at the corpses. The result was very surprising. The arrows didn't pierce the corpses of these people. According to this subordinate's guess, these people's physique is mostly at the top hunter level, or their magic marks are inclined to strengthen their bodies." "Oh? The arrows couldn't pierce the corpses? Are you sure?" "I'm sure. It seems that the Dark Church has sent out all their masters. I didn't expect that the Dark Church would have hidden such a powerful master. Their corpses weren't damaged by arrows. I don't know how strong they would be if they were alive." On the other side of the Knights' Hall, everyone was discussing. "The Dark Church can't wait to make a move. It seems that the glory of the new Pope isn't completely fake. They should have sent a lot of masters to assassinate the Pope. I didn't expect them to all die. The strength of the new Pope can't be underestimated. There may be masters hidden around him. If we can know which masters they sent from the Dark Church, then we can know the strength of the Holy Church." When the corpses of Francis and the others were paraded in the street, the most surprised people were the dark followers who were hiding in the dark alleys. When they saw the black tattoos on the corpses, they were disappointed but also excited. They didn't expect that the Dark Church they were loyal to was so powerful that they dared to assassinate the Pope. Although they failed, but most likely the Pope was scared out of his wit. At the same time, the elders of the Dark Church held an emergency meeting after they got the news. "Who sent people to assassinate the Pope? Which faction did it? Why didn't you discuss this matter in advance? Aren't you beating the grass to scare the snake? Bastard!" Everyone was angry as they questioned the person who made the decision. However, after half an hour of questioning, it seemed that no one had sent people to assassinate the Pope. Some people were dumbfounded for a moment. Soon they thought that it was possible that other forces had framed the Dark Church. At the end of the meeting, the elders of the 12 districts received a secret letter from Dean. Sword King read the contents of the letter. Everyone was stunned as they looked at each other. They didn't expect that Dean was the one who directed the assassination. Moreover, it seemed that the purpose of the assassination was to pave the way for the military headquarters and the Knights' Hall. Terrible! The entire conference room was silent after the secret letter was read. In the blink of an eye, the day passed. Chapter 649. Master, Commander-in-Chief Bryson has colluded with the Dark Believers? Barton was shocked as he heard Dudien's words. The news was too shocking. Dudien was one of the most powerful people in the military headquarters. It was unbelievable that he had dealings with the dirty and evil followers of the dark religion. Collusion is false, but he is guilty. Dean didn't deceive Barton. The only obstacles in front of us are the military headquarters and the magistrate. The Knights' Hall is nothing to be afraid of. They will be trampled under the feet of the believers. We don't hurt others, so we won't be hurt by others. We seem to be high and mighty, but in fact there is no way to retreat. Do you know? Barton understood half of Dean's words. Although he didn't fully understand, but he understood 2 points. First was that Commander-in-Chief Bryson was wronged because he was the enemy. Second was that Dean's purpose was to rule the entire outer wall. Perhaps this was just the beginning. He didn't know what to say. In his mind, the title Commander-in-Chief contained too much solemnity. He didn't think that he would be slandered and destroyed because he was an obstacle. He didn't know whether Dean was right or wrong. He was at a loss. Dean understood Barton's thoughts from his expression. He patted his shoulder. Don't think too much about it. Think about what the military has done. Think about the families of the civilians who were forcibly separated by the military. Think about the military's bullying of the civilians. It's all because of their lack of discipline. They acquiesce to it. That's their sin. Barton stared blankly for a moment. In his mind, scenes of the army coming to the slums and forcibly arresting able-bodied men suddenly appeared. The softness in his heart immediately hardened. He nodded forcefully and said, "I know they are not worthy of sympathy. Go." Dudyan said. Richelieu sighed in his heart as he watched Barton leave. He turned to look at the black-haired boy and said, "Are we really going to attack the military? Bryson is the commander-in-chief. Even if the Dark Church cooperates and produces conclusive evidence to prove that he is colluding with the Dark Believers, the military will not let us take him away so easily. Otherwise, I would have used this method long ago." "You didn't use it before because you had too many concerns." Dean's face was indifferent. "There are too many concerns and too little courage. In the past, aristocrats, military generals, as long as they have privileges, even if they colluded with the Dark Church and committed despicable acts, you would turn a blind eye to it. Some aristocrats sell human organs, some sell orphans from slums. You are aware of these things, but you acquiesce to them. This is your sin. Every one of us is guilty, and every one of us deserves to die." Dean stood on the steps and looked down at him, but only the strong can judge others. "The biggest sin of death is being weak." Richelieu was stunned. He lowered his head in silence. "Bryson will not give in obediently, and the military will not allow such a thing to happen. They will lose face and prestige, and will resist tenaciously. This is a declaration of war." Dean said in a cold voice. "My purpose in controlling the Holy Church is to use the name of the Holy Church to sweep away all forces. No matter what the war is, as long as you stand on the side of the people's will, you will always win. This is the lesson that history has taught us. You will never understand." Richelieu's heart was touched. As the Pope, he had managed the Holy Church for many years. He was deeply aware of the importance of the existence of faith. There was no need to spend any resources. With just a few words, countless believers were willing to sacrifice their lives without fear. This was the power of faith. But the youth in front of him was more thorough. It was the will of the people. The nobles, the military, and even the Knights' Hall didn't take the commoners seriously. Just from the way the commoners blurted out the word untouchables, it was easy to see what kind of discrimination it was. However, only he knew that although the commoners were weak, they could be an unbeatable force when they gathered together. It was enough to overthrow everything. And this point, besides him, this youth was actually able to comprehend it as well. Just this breadth of vision alone was enough to make him feel terrified. This is not an arrest operation, but a full-scale declaration of war. Dean stared at Richelieu. "This time I need you to personally lead the team. Let the King of Light cooperate with you to defeat the military in one fell swoop. Do you understand?" Richelieu stared at him blankly. After a while, he slowly lowered his head. "I understand. I will do it. Go, I'll be here waiting for your good news," Dean indifferently said. Richelieu deeply bowed and turned to leave. The entire Holy Church was boiling when the Holy Edict came out. The news quickly spread to all forces and even to the civilians. "Commander-in-Chief Bryson is colluding with the Dark Believers? Oh my God, the dignified Commander-in-Chief is mixing with the Dark Believers. No wonder the Dark Believers are so arrogant. In recent days they have been appearing in the commercial district. It turns out that there is a military backing them. Will the military hand over Bryson? They won't let the Holy Church take away such a big deal. In the past, they arrested a general who had made a deal with the Dark Believers. Caused a lot of friction. Is this news true? The civilians speculated. The nobles of the 6 consortiums, magistrate and the Knights' Hall were shocked when they heard the news. They knew the consequences of the Holy Church's announcement. It was equivalent to a formal declaration of war with the military. If the Holy Church retreated, then the prestige of the Holy Church would be greatly damaged. But if Bryson was sentenced, then the prestige of the military would be damaged. This news was equivalent to a declaration of war between the 2 forces. Father, is this true? Is Commander-in-Chief Bryson colluding with the Dark Believers? Child, your political awareness is still too shallow. The Holy Church is deliberately looking for an excuse to start a war. Moreover, if the Holy Church wins, then the outer wall will be dominated by the Holy Church. So that's how it is. In other words, this thing is fake? It doesn't matter if it's true or false. What's important is power. People will take it seriously even if it's a lie. People will take it seriously if it's a lie or not. People will take it seriously if it's a lie or not. I see. It's like us aristocrats. No matter what we say, the untouchables will believe it. Yes, the untouchables won't be jealous of the aristocrats, but they will be jealous of the untouchables. Chapter 650. Riley, there's something I want you to do. Inside the temple, Dean called Riley, who was accompanying Barton. Help me go to the military region and pick up a person. His name is Joseph, and his rank shouldn't be high. Go to the Elder Hawkeye of the 9th region and ask him to give you detailed information. In addition, ask him to send people to assist you in this matter. Be sure to pick up this person safely. Riley bowed his head. Yes. Don't pick up the wrong person. Dean looked at him and handed him a letter. Help me pass this to Hawkeye. Yes. Riley bowed his head. This is your paladin badge. You don't need to sneak in and out of the Holy Church. Dean threw him a blue badge. I know what your wish is. I'll let you fulfill your wish after you finish this matter. Riley's body slightly trembled. Yes. Dean got up and came to the entrance of the temple. He saw Barton practicing his swordsmanship in front of the grass target. He called out to him. Barton heard the call and immediately stopped. He turned around and put away the wooden sword. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and trotted over the step. He came to Dean and asked, Master, are you looking for me? I haven't given you any gifts after following me for so long. Dean took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat from Barton's forehead. I have something for you. Come with me. Barton was moved as he looked at Dean, who was carefully wiping the sweat from his forehead. Although he felt that Dean was very different from before, but there was no difference in the way Dean treated him. Young master, you've already given me the position of Pope. I can't take anything else from you, Barton quickly said. Dean handed him the handkerchief. Let's take a look. Barton took the handkerchief and slightly clenched it. He followed Dean into the hall. Dean came to the desk, opened the drawer and took out a black wooden box. There is a rare and precious parasitic soul worm inside. It's called the Listener. I asked someone to find it for you. Now that you are in a high position, you will encounter hostility from all directions in the future. You have to improve your strength. Are you willing to use it? Barton was dumbfounded. He was no longer an ignorant and inexperienced person. When he was an apprentice knight, he already knew about the existence of magic marks, as well as the differences in levels, and the rare parasitic soul worm was basically the best magic mark. As for the more powerful legendary parasitic soul worm, it only existed in the legend, and no one had ever seen it. He did not expect that Dean would quietly prepare such a big gift for him. Yes, of course I'm willing. Barton was grateful in his heart, but then he thought of something and said, Such a precious magic mark, do you really want to give it to me? If it is wasted, you are my brother. If I don't give it to you, who else would I give it to? Dean patted his shoulder. In the future, if we defeat the inner wall and get a legendary parasitic soul worm, then I'll give it to you. Barton's eyes were slightly moist. He lowered his head so that Dean wouldn't see him. But his heart was moved beyond words. After a moment, he took a deep breath and said, I'm already very satisfied to get this. Dean handed him the black wooden box. You can use the resources to upgrade the magic mark. There should be a lot of God's blessings stored in the Holy Church. Barton nodded and held the wooden box tightly. At the same time, there was a fierce debate in the conference room of the military headquarters in the west of the commercial district. How dare the Holy Church do this? They are openly slandering Commander Bryson. Is the new pope's brain kicked by a pig? The Holy Church is ready to declare war on us. Humph, they actually found such a poor excuse. Sir, we swear to defend you. A group of generals were filled with righteous indignation. Some of the hot-tempered ones even slapped the table. Bryson sat on the left side of the seat of honor with a gloomy expression. He didn't expect that the Vatican would attack them so soon after the new emperor was appointed. Shouldn't they focus on dealing with the voices of the rebels within the Vatican? Moreover, out of the 3 commanders, he was chosen. No matter what the outcome was, it would be an irreparable loss to his personal reputation. Commander Bryson. Lorenzo, who was next to him, turned to look at him. His eyes were deep, as if he could see the depths of Bryson's heart. But Bryson calmly looked back at him. There was no fear in his eyes. Lorenzo slowly said, We believe that you won't collude with the dark believers. The Holy Church didn't discuss the news with us in advance. They should be ready to seize you. Bryson's eyes flashed. If I'm guilty, I'm willing to bear it alone. No. One of the generals immediately stood up and shouted, You are the commander-in-chief of our military region. How can you let the Holy Church put you on trial? Who do they think they are? I don't believe it. That's right. Someone immediately agreed. It's ridiculous that the Holy Church is slandering you. They want to put you on trial? They are overestimating themselves. Lorenzo nodded slightly. Yes, you represent our entire military region. We won't let you bear it alone. No matter what evidence the Holy Church has, we must make them give us a reasonable explanation. This is openly undermining the prestige of our military region. Bryson didn't speak. He knew that his identity was too embarrassing at this time. Not speaking was the best way. If the Holy Church wants to put the commander-in-chief on trial, they will have to ask the sword in my hand. I don't believe that the Holy Church dares to go to war with our military region. This order was issued by the new pope. Most of them want to step on Commander Bryson's shoulder to deter others. Lorenzo saw that the generals were getting emotional. He raised his hand and said, Immediately send someone to the Holy Church to ask about this matter. Also tell them that they won't have a good result if they start a war with our military region. Commander, I'm willing to go myself. Commander, I'll go. Several generals immediately raised their hand. Lorenzo glanced at the female generals and said, Lorraine, you go. You have a meticulous mind, so it's best if you go. Remember, don't be too tough and don't be weak. Yes. The female general immediately stood up. At the same time, Riley arrived at the 9th region. He handed the letter to Hawkeye. Hawkeye opened the letter and quickly read it. Riley quietly looked at him. Chapter 651. Riley's eyes flickered, but he did not ask. Hawkeye glanced at him, pondered for a moment and said, You go and pick him up first. I will send 5 knight leaders to assist you. This is the information on Joseph. Don't make a mistake. Riley took it, glanced at it, and nodded. Got it. After Riley left, Hawkeye immediately called his secretary and asked her to write several secret letters and send them to various places as fast as possible. Military, pitiful. Hawkeye put away the secret letters and burned them on a candle, sighing softly. At the foot of Mount Wutuaw, Richelieu was wearing the holy armor of the past, sitting on his holy sun dragon horse majestically. In the large square in front of him, there were constantly knights of light gathering, densely packed, occupying the entire square. There were about tens of thousands of people, almost more than 60% of the troops of the Vatican stationed in the business district. Although the number of knights of the Vatican could not be compared to the number of soldiers of the army, but in terms of quality, they were far superior. Your Majesty! A burly middle-aged man riding on a 3-meter-tall horse galloped over from afar. A 3-meter-long sword hung on the side of his horse's abdomen. It was nearly half a meter wide. It was extremely huge. Richelieu looked at the man and waited until he came close before saying, "PLO, don't call me Your Majesty anymore. If it wasn't for the fact that this matter is too troublesome, I was prepared to find a field to live a simple life." PLO's bell-like eyes stared, bright and full of expression, and said, "In my heart, you will always be my Majesty. Why did you let that person be the Pope? Is it really like what they said, that you are unwell? I'm old, it's time to step aside." Richelieu shook his head slightly. "Let's not talk about this. This time we will lead the team to arrest Bryson. Are you ready? Are we really going to break off relations with the military?" PLO's face showed some seriousness. Although he looked rough, it did not mean that he was brainless. Richelieu glanced at him and said, "Watch your words. We uphold the belief of punishing evil and eradicating evil. Bryson has colluded with the dark cultists, and the evidence is conclusive. No matter who he is, he must pay the price for his actions. This is the meaning of our existence." PLO immediately said solemnly, "Your subordinate misspoke, you are right. Let's go." Richelieu pulled the reins of his horse and said, "Let the main force follow behind. You will follow me and lead the light cavalry to the military base first. We will treat them politely. If the military base insists on protecting Bryson, then we will consider using forceful methods." "I got it." PLO nodded. The news of the movement of the Church's army spread through the street. Countless commoners and nobles along the way all heard of this news. Seeing the formation, they instantly knew that the Church was serious this time. The news quickly spread to the conference room of the military headquarters. The people who hadn't left the meeting heard the news and immediately fell into silence. Richelieu and the great Light King, PLO, are actually going into battle personally? Are they going to start a war with us? The Light Curia has come so quickly. They're trying to catch us off guard. It seems that they have also expected that this matter will not go as they wish. Damn it, General Roland has just set off. Lorenzo glanced at the furious generals and turned to look at Bryson. He knew that this was not the time for internal strife. Although the three commanders usually fought each other secretly, if they were to fight internally this time, it would only allow the Church to succeed. In the end, even if there was one less commander, it would still cause the military base to lose all its face. It would also cause him, who was also a commander, to lose face. Delay them first and wait for Roland's reply. Lorenzo immediately ordered, "Call back the troops of the City Defense Department and prepare for battle." Yes. A 5-star general who was the head of the City Defense Department immediately stood up to receive the order. A moment later, Richelieu and PLO led a group of light cavalry to the front of the military headquarters. The back of the compound was not just a manor, but a vast green field. It contained the military camp of the military base, the residence of the general, as well as the training grounds and many other places. It was an important area of the military base, and also a restricted area for civilians. Richelieu stopped his horse and looked at a guard who trotted over to the front of the compound. The guard had already received the news from above. Seeing the majestic Richelieu and PLO sitting on the tall horses, his heart was nervous and in awe. Although he did not believe in the Light Curia, his wife was very religious, including his mother and father. Under the atmosphere of the family's religious beliefs, he was more or less infected. At this moment, facing the two supreme figures of the Curia, He only felt as if there were 2 mountains on his head and shoulders, making him unconsciously bend down and lower his head. "Boy, go call someone who can take charge," Pulo shouted before the guard could speak. The guard was shocked and hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, I'll go now, please wait a moment." After saying that, he did not care about being rude and hurriedly turned around and ran. After a moment, Lorenzo came out on horseback with several generals. He saw Richelieu and Pulo stopped at the gate. There were dozens of light cavalry behind them. Lorenzo's eyes moved slightly. He gently pressed on the horse's back, and the mount immediately slowed down. He slowly walked towards Richelieu and smiled. "Mr. Richelieu, Mr. Pulo, the people below don't know any better. Please come in with me." With a smile on his face, Richelieu said, "They say that soldiers are straightforward. Commander, please don't beat around the bush with us. I'm sure you know why we're here. Give us a straightforward answer. Are you going to hand him over or bail him out?" Lorenzo's smile slowly disappeared as he saw Richelieu being so direct. He looked at him. "Do you have any evidence that Commander Bryson is colluding with the Dark Believers? There's something fishy about this matter. I think it's better to investigate and then arrest the culprit. After all, Bryson is the commander of our military region. How will we maintain the security of the outer wall if he's arrested by you?" "Naturally we have evidence," Richelieu said. "If you don't believe me, then please let Commander Bryson come out to meet us." Lorenzo slightly frowned. "Commander Bryson is performing official duties outside. I can help you call him back, but it will take some time. How about you come in with me to rest?" Richelieu narrowed his eyes. "No need. We will wait here." Lorenzo didn't say much as he saw that Dudien didn't eat soft words. He politely said a few words and then rode back. That old bastard Richelieu. He doesn't listen to good words. Does he really think that the military region is afraid of him? One of the generals said in an angry tone as they entered the courtyard. Although he deliberately restrained his voice, but it wasn't difficult to hear his words since they weren't far from the courtyard. Lorenzo looked at him and knew that he was deliberately saying this for Richelieu to hear. He said, "Don't be rude. When the matter is investigated, they will give Commander Bryson justice." Although he was reprimanding the general, there was no anger on his face. "Little bastard." There was a trace of anger in Pulo's eyes as he heard the voices coming from the back of the courtyard. He tightened his grip on the rope. Richelieu indifferently said, "Don't be angry. The dog bit you, so you can't bite the dog back." Pulo slightly gritted his teeth. He knew that the other party was deliberately provoking them. The military region would take the opportunity to cover up Bryson's matter. Richelieu heard the sound of hooves of Lorenzo and others going away. He turned to Pulo. "Don't worry. Since they want to delay, then let them do it. The longer they delay, the better it is for us." "Good for us?" Pulo was puzzled. He bit the bullet. "Go." When Lorraine stepped onto Mount Wutuo, the 18 noble families of the Huasheng financial group on the other side expressed their support for the church's crusade. At the same time, the 3 famous masters in the poetry world also published articles in the Express at the same time. Their slogan was extremely loud: "Purify all darkness." For a time, many masters who were deeply loved by the common people, including painters and musicians, all stood up to express their views. "I hope the military doesn't harbor criminals." As the dignified commander-in-chief, he colluded with the dark cultists and bullied civilians. "It's simply despicable." God said that the existence of light is to dispel all darkness. I agree with the sacrificial spirit of the Holy Church. It will be a disaster for the entire outer wall if the military decides to cover up their accomplices. It will lead to rivers of blood. I hope the military will reconsider. The sword of a knight, the glory of a guardian knight. The sword of the Church, the light of the guardian deity. All evil and darkness will be destroyed. I hope that the military can execute Bryson personally and give justice to everyone. Think twice? Think twice, my ass. In the conference room of the military headquarters, everyone looked at the news report that had just been sent to them. All of them were furious. Why don't you accuse the Holy Church of being reckless if you know that it will affect the entire outer wall? A bunch of bastards. A general pounded on the table. They don't distinguish right from wrong. They don't have any evidence, and yet they persuade us to be kind. Shameless. Shameless. We have protected them in the past, and now they are accusing us. They haven't even investigated the matter, and yet they are supporting the Holy Church. What a group of pigs. Another general was equally angry. His beard was trembling. Lorenzo's face was gloomy. There must be something fishy going on here. The Holy Church's hands are deep enough to make the magistrate, the Hall of Knights, the nobles, and the masters all stand up. How sinister! What is Lorraine doing? She hasn't come back yet? Isn't it enough for her to go back and forth to the Holy Church? Another one-eyed general roared. Another person next to him replied, Don't count on it. It seems that the Holy Church will break off relations with the military. It's useless for Lorraine to go. She will be delayed by them. Damn the Holy Church! How come I didn't know that they were so cunning? Well, they are deceiving the world in the name of God. They despise God the most. It's too late to say this. What should we do? Do we really have to go to war? Everyone looked at each other. At this moment, another announcement came from the outside. A captain quickly ran in and handed over the dispatch in his hand. The general standing at the end of the table took the news. Another general next to him asked, What news is it? I don't need to read it to know that someone is supporting the Holy Church. Another general mocked. The general who took the news opened the newspaper and quickly glanced through it. His face suddenly changed. He looked at Bryson, who had been sitting silently at the conference table. Commander, the Holy Church has sealed your castle. They have also found the dark cultists hiding in your property. They are being punished on the street. What? Everyone was shocked. St. Lorenzo couldn't help but look at Bryson, who was next to him, and saw that the latter was also shocked. The other generals looked at Bryson. In addition to shock, there was also a hint of suspicion. Could it be that this was not a slander by the Holy Church, but Bryson was actually secretly colluding with the dark cultists? Thinking of this, the surging atmosphere suddenly became a little cold. Bryson reacted and clenched his fists in anger. This is a frame-up. The despicable Holy Church actually used such a dirty method to frame me. They must have colluded with the Dark Church. Chapter 653. Get out of the way! Get out of the way! On the streets of Berlin, hundreds of Knights of Light completely surrounded a luxurious manor. At this moment, 2 knight captains were escorting a stooped old man in a black robe out of the manor. The old man's black robe was dirty and stained with dark green and other strange-colored potions. His silver-gray hair was messy and his head was lowered. On his withered arm, which was exposed under the robe, there was a black tattoo that looked like a poisonous snake. Under the sunlight, it was exceptionally eye-catching and frightening. Outside the defensive line formed by a large number of knights, there was a large crowd of onlookers. When they saw the black-robed old man being taken out, someone immediately cried out in surprise and couldn't help but retreat. The black robe was often worn by the dark disciples, although some adventurers also preferred to wear it. But the black tattoo was the devil's symbol that everyone feared. It seemed that the pure black pattern itself represented disease, disaster, and death. Dark disciple. Kill him. Burn him. Why are you keeping him alive? Burn him. There was a burst of vague roars from the back of the crowd, but the people standing in the front row didn't say anything. It seemed that they were worried that the dark disciple would be angered and commit murder. Although there were a large number of Knights of Light around and they were under the sun, the shadow that the dark disciple had accumulated in their hearts all year round couldn't be dispelled. Did the deepest darkness come from the heart? The old man in a black robe lowered his head, as if he didn't hear the screams and roars around him. He silently walked forward. There was a huge shackle on his ankle. With every step he took, the shackle rubbed against his ankle. There was already blood oozing from the shackle and sliding down the back of his foot, staining the ground. He was barefoot. With every step he took, he could feel the roughness of the earth and the thickness of the ground that was warmed by the sun. How long had it been since he walked barefoot like this? He slowly raised his head and looked ahead. He saw the Knights of Light at the defensive line holding hands and forming a circle. Outside the circle, there were countless unfamiliar faces looking at him with fear and anger. Walking from one circle to another, it seemed that it was always out of reach. His gaze continued to move upwards, looking at the fluttering white clouds in the sky. A gentle breeze blew, and he felt bursts of warmth, as well as a kind of relief. It will be over soon, he thought silently in his heart, and a young face appeared in his mind. That was his grandson, and also his only remaining relative. His death would allow him to live. This seemed to be very fair. Birth always seemed to be accompanied by death. Death also meant a new life. He was old, and he felt that it was worth it to exchange his aged body for his grandson's life. After all, he was still a child. He still had many years to live. "Behave yourselves," a knight captain berated. The old man staggered 2 steps forward. The pain from the friction of the shackles made him grin slightly, but he endured it and did not cry out. After living for so many years, he was already used to pain. Behind the old man and the 2 commanders, there were dozens of Knights of Light escorting more than a dozen people wearing strange black clothes. The style of these black clothes was strange, but the people of the Dark Church could recognize them at a glance. They were the clothes of apprentices. Soon, all of them were escorted to the street and knelt in a row. The onlookers gradually became bolder as they saw the followers of the Dark Church being so obedient. They roared in anger, "Burn them to death! Burn these devils to death!" A knight captain glanced at the crowd outside. He saw that the time was almost up, so he immediately called a knight to prepare for the execution. "In the name of God, I sentence you." A paladin came, holding a silver sword. He raised it high in the sky. The light shined on the blade of the sword. It was dazzling and reflected a rainbow halo. After reading the sentence, he walked in front of the old man. "Do you have anything else to say?" The old man was silent for a moment, then suddenly shouted, "We pledge our lives to follow Lord Bryson." "Evil creature, damn you!" the paladin roared as he suddenly waved his sword. Puff! The blade of the sword was exceptionally sharp. It instantly cut off the old man's head. A huge head fell to the ground. Blood splashed on the people next to him. A young man who was kneeling next to him was pale. He fell to the ground and screamed in horror. Immediately, a knight pressed down on his shoulder. "Kill! Kill them all!" The shouts outside became even more ferocious. The paladin executed the sentence one by one. Heads fell to the ground one by one. The bloody scene made some women close their eyes in fear. They covered their eyes and retreated to the back of the crowd. Soon, all of them were executed. The knight captain loudly said, "The followers of the Dark Church are conducting evil experiments here. They have all been executed. If you have any clues about the followers of the Dark Church, please report it to the Holy Church. The Holy Church will reward you handsomely." "Good. The Holy Church shines brightly," a few voices shouted from the crowd. The rest of the crowd immediately cheered. Waves of earth-shattering cheers could be heard. The 2 knight captains looked at each other and ordered their subordinates to clean up the corpses on the ground. They also cleaned up the bloodstains. Then they left the crowd. As they left, the crowd that gathered on the street also gradually dispersed. They only looked at the luxurious manor behind the pool of blood with awe and fear in their eyes. Everyone who lived on this street knew that the owner of this manor was the mansion of Commander Bryson of the military headquarters. Many people also heard the cry of the old man who was beheaded before he died. I can't believe that Commander Bryson actually colluded with the followers of the Dark Church. And he even harbored the followers of the Dark Church to conduct experiments in his residence. Disgusting. Shoo, lower your voice. Don't let others hear you. The crowd gradually dispersed, whispering to each other. Beside a carriage parked outside a high-class restaurant, a young noble casually looked in the direction of the luxurious manor. Beside him stood a delicate girl. She asked curiously, "Young master, I heard from my father that the church is going to arrest the commander-in-chief of the military this time. Is this true?" The young man said indifferently, "Who cares if it's true or not? What does it have to do with us? What if the Holy Church and the military started fighting? Wouldn't there be a war? That has nothing to do with us nobles. Do you think they would dare to attack us?" "That's true, let's go and eat your favorite foie gras with plum juice. Commander Bryson, we believe in your innocence. There must be something fishy about this matter." St. Lorenzo looked at the flustered and exasperated Bryson and comforted him. Bryson glanced at him. His heart was filled with anger. He thought, "Maybe you colluded with the Holy Church to frame me. You want to use the Holy Church to get rid of me. Stupid." When the others heard St. Lorenzo's words, they immediately knew that this time the military must protect Commander Bryson. They didn't dare to show any strange expressions. However, they couldn't help but curse in their hearts. "Only you dare to say that the Holy Church colluded with the followers of the Dark Church to frame you. Who would believe that? Since the Holy Church doesn't care about the reputation of our military, we don't need to talk to them anymore. Let's see the truth with our fists." St. Lorenzo looked at the people present and said, "Commander Bryson would never collude with the followers of the Dark Church. The Holy Church is clearly trying to humiliate our military. We must make the Holy Church apologize for this matter. Since they have the so-called evidence to force us to submit, we can only beat them into submission and then discuss with them." The generals looked at each other. They didn't expect that although he was old, his courage was still the same. When he was young, he was nicknamed the Golden Lion. This showed how irritable he was. "I agree with the commander. This battle is unavoidable." The Holy Church investigated the evidence and made a decision without discussing with us in advance. Once we give in, we will never be able to face anyone again. We must make the Holy Church apologize. That's right. Everyone agreed. Bryson was stunned. There was a trace of tears in his eyes. He stood up and held St. Lorenzo's hands. His heart was filled with guilt and gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you for trusting me. We are old comrades. Don't mention it." St. Lorenzo smiled. Bryson's heart was stirred. Indeed, he and St. Lorenzo were comrades who went through life and death situations together. Later, they both made contributions and became commanders. For so many years, they competed for power and plotted against each other. But he didn't expect that in this life and death situation, the most reliable person was the enemy who they had fought against in the past. "Richelieu and the Great Light King are waiting outside. Should we capture them first?" a general asked. St. Lorenzo's eyes flickered. "We can't attack directly. Otherwise, even if we win, the people will think that we forced the Holy Church to admit their mistake. Not only do we have to fight, but we also have to fight on the side of innocence." The generals were excited and looked at him curiously. St. Lorenzo glanced at the crowd and immediately whispered his plan. After listening to his words, the entire place fell into a brief silence. Everyone looked at each other with admiration on their faces. "Commander is wise. This is a brilliant plan. This time, we will make the Holy Church's teeth break." Chapter 654. Time back to half an hour ago. I've been waiting for an hour. Is the Pope still not willing to see me? Lorraine angrily looked at the deacon of the Holy Church in front of her. She knew from the attitude of the deacon that it was useless for her to come here. The Holy Church didn't just want to punish Commander Bryson. They wanted to have a decisive battle with the military. General Lorraine, please calm down. His Majesty asked me to invite you over. The deacon smiled. Lorraine felt suffocated. She had already planned to leave. She had rushed here at such a critical moment, and it was impossible that the church did not know her purpose. However, they had left her here with the excuse of dealing with official business. It was obvious that they were deliberately stalling for time. However, after waiting for so long, if he were to leave now, it would be a waste of his time. She gritted her teeth in anger and said, "Then lead the way." She followed the deacon to the temple at the back of St. Mark's Square. She was startled as soon as she entered the temple. Barton was sitting in front of a table. He was wearing a pontiff's robe and holding a scepter. On the other side of the table sat a figure that she recognized at a glance. Dean. She had long heard about this genius, especially during the last barbarian invasion. The news of him donating legendary items for free had spread throughout the outer wall. As a soldier, she knew the situation better than anyone else. She knew how terrible the role of the legendary item was. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was the legendary item that turned defeat into victory for the military and expelled the barbarians from the country. It was also because of this that many soldiers and generals in the military headquarters were grateful to him. This was not as simple as winning or losing a battle, but it had saved the lives of countless soldiers and countless families. Barton looked up at the female general. He was nervous and cramped. "Is there something you want to talk to me about?" Lorraine came back to her senses. She resisted the impulse to go crazy. "Your Majesty the Pope, is it true that you found out that Commander Bryson colluded with the Dark Believers? Commander Lorenza thinks that there is something fishy about it. I hope you can investigate it in detail so that our military is innocent." Barton didn't know how to respond. He turned to look at Dean. Lorraine was staring at the new Pope's face. She was stunned when she saw the Pope turn around to ask Dean's opinion. She subconsciously looked at the genius who had appeared out of nowhere and then quickly disappeared. She found that the latter's temperament was calm and indifferent. There wasn't the slightest emotion on his face. He was as unfathomable and unreachable as the starry sky. "It's black. How can it be innocent?" Dean glanced at Lorraine. Lorraine was stunned. She even suspected that there was something wrong with her ears. She widened her eyes and said, "Mr. Dew? What did you say?" "I said you are black. How can I bleach you?" Dean repeated patiently. Lorraine was sure that it wasn't an illusion. She turned to look at the new Pope. She saw that the latter was quietly looking at her. It seemed that he had given the right to speak to Dean. She was confused. Although she admired the young genius, but the latter was just a genius. What would he know about the chaos of the entire outer wall? However, she couldn't understand the attitude of the new Pope. She felt incredible. "Mr. Dean, I hope you don't talk nonsense. You should be responsible for your words." Although confused, Lorraine still stared at Duddian and said. At the same time, her favorable impression of Duddian instantly decreased. "Of course I will be responsible." Dean glanced at her. "I have said that I will replace your military region. I will definitely replace your military region. I always mean what I say when it comes to my enemies." Lorraine was stunned. She stared at him in disbelief. Are you crazy? What nonsense are you talking about?" She turned to Barton. "Your Majesty the Pope, Mr. Dean has maliciously insulted our military region. I ask you to sanction him immediately." Barton slightly spread out his hands. "I can't sanction the young master." "Young master?" Lorraine was confused. Dean shook his head as he saw her slow response. "The military asked you to come over to make a private reconciliation. It's really stupid. If you have any illusions about the enemy, then you will be harming yourself. Just like you are now." Lorraine stared at him blankly. Although she did not understand what he meant, she had already understood. However, the truth was so unbelievable and terrifying that she felt like she was in a dream. You're the real Pope? How is it possible that Richelieu would give up his position to you? Why would he work for you? She couldn't imagine how a genius in the field of invention could have the ability to reach this step. You don't need to think about it because you are the losers. The losers will never know the real reason why they failed. Dean's expression was indifferent as he put the teacup on the table. The three commanders have no way out. They should be planning how to make us suffer and swallow the consequences of their recklessness. I guess they will create a bigger scandal to cover up Commander Bryson's matter. Then they will take the opportunity to attack the Holy Church and get the nominal justice. Lorraine looked at him. Her thoughts were chaotic, and she was at a loss. It's a pity. Your dreams are beautiful, but you will never know how many of my spies are in your military headquarters. Dean looked down at her. Moreover, the military has sent a general here. It's a heavy coffin lid. Lorraine suddenly sobered up. There was a strong, ominous premonition in her heart. What do you want to do? I'm just here to send a message. You can't kill me. Dean indifferently glanced at her and turned to Barton. Are you ready? Barton bowed his head. Master, I'm ready. He revealed his arm, which was wrapped in white bandages. Lorraine was startled. Conference room of the military headquarters. St. Lorenzo raised his hand to suppress the admiration of the generals and said, Just do it. Time is of the essence and there is no time to lose. Yes. The generals immediately obeyed. Report. Almost at the exact same moment, a report suddenly rang out from outside, and a major rushed in with a dispatch in his hand. Everyone's eyelids twitched as they saw the newspaper in his hand. They instinctively had an ominous feeling. It seemed that every newspaper that came today was bad news. What's the matter? Lorenza stood up and looked at the newspaper. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.